Stephen is a water resources coordinator at the city of Santa Fe. Mr. Schultz worked for 20 years in the private sector where he gained extensive experience in numerical groundwater modeling and dynamic simulation modeling to support municipal water supply planning. Stephen has been with the city of Santa Fe for 2 years. He's enjoying applying his technical skills locally to help ensure a sustainable and reliable water source for the city of Santa Fe. Thank you, Stephen.
Hi, I guess I want to start by saying thank you to the organizers. I feel humbled and privileged to be able to speak to this great audience. We've heard a lot about the San Juan Chama project this morning, as well as the Colorado River Basin, and I'm really a numbers person, so I'm going to dive into the technical details here, and I don't know, for some of you, maybe that's good to keep you awake after lunch. Hopefully I don't put you all to sleep with too many numbers. So the title I call Where's the Water? 21st Century San Juan Chama Project Hydrology. So I'll be talking about the millennial drought as well as projections of climate change moving forward. And this is a picture of Heron, somewhat recently, not a whole lot of water in there. So we'll talk about where that water went. The map, I couldn't talk here at this conference without the map that we've seen, I think, in every presentation. So we're looking at this, the source waters of the San Juan Chama project are in the map on the right-hand side. And this has already been explained. There's 3 diversions from 3 tributary basins. Water flows through the Azotea Tunnel, underneath the Continental Divide, and out into Heron Reservoir. So I wanted to sort of talk a little bit about the importance of San Juan Chama water. I'm with the city of Santa Fe. It's a super critical water supply source for us. But starting sort of big picture, we've talked about the contractors. You've seen a list of the contractors already. There's tribal irrigation and M&I use. The M&I use, at least for Albuquerque and Santa Fe, is an important story to tell. Albuquerque and Santa Fe are fairly similar, generally speaking, historically, of overpumping groundwater. And then recently, Albuquerque in 2008, Santa Fe in 2011, bringing on the San Juan Chama renewable surface water supply source. And it's really helped these 2 municipalities, at least, shift to a balanced renewable supply. So really, really important. Also wanted to note that the contracts allow for full consumptive use of the supply. And Bill Schneider's gonna be talking after me about this from the city of Santa Fe about our plans to fully consume our San Juan Chama water. So let's get into the hydrology a little bit. So Carolyn and I think alike. We put quotes around the firm yield, 96,200 acre feet. We all know we haven't been getting that recently. But putting in the perspective of the state of New Mexico, the Rio Grande Compact allows a maximum consumptive use in the state of New Mexico of 400,000 acre feet. So this additional almost 100,000 acre feet is really a big boost to the Rio Grande Basin, municipalities, agricultural, tribal use alike. So this is what it looks like in the headwaters. The basins are outlined in black there. The Blanco Basin is, Blanco and Navajo are the big basins. Little Navajo is the little one there. This picture is taken from up in the Navajo Basin on the fire resiliency tour a couple months ago that was mentioned earlier. And I think Emma is going to be speaking more about that tomorrow, the fire resiliency projects. I will just say that the headwaters, it's the ridge line there along the Continental Divide is generally up above 12,000 feet elevation. So this is high alpine environment up there. Our diversions, almost all, as we heard earlier, or almost all come from Blanco and Navajo Basin. 46% from Blanco Basin, 50% from Navajo Basin, and then just 4% for Little Navajo Basin. Okay, so Carolyn had talked about sort of the rules in place, and let me start by explaining what this graph actually shows. So it's a log scale on the left of CFS flow in Navajo River. The bands of blue there you're looking at, half of all the historical flow, on the x-axis, it's a calendar year from January 1st to December 31st. That dark blue band, on any given day there, half of all historical flows have been within that dark blue band. And then going out to the lighter blue bands, it's 80% of the flows, the next range. And then the full color spectrum there is the entire range of historical flows. So what you see straight off is that May, June is really the primary high flow season up there. What does that say? It says this is a snowmelt driven system. And now I'll get to the rules. Like Carolyn had already mentioned them. There's kind of just three rules on the diversions, if you break it down simply. There's the bypass flows, and then there's the annual maximum flow and the 10-year maximum flows. As Carolyn mentioned, the 1-year limit and the 10-year limit, we've never even approached those numbers. So we're down to just one real limit, and that's the bypass flows. So the bypass flows are on the line here, the solid kind of reddish line. And if you look over on kind of the right side, what does this mean? It means that we can divert, as the San Juan Chama project, everything above the red line. So if you look out toward the right, half the time late in the season, there's no water coming through to the San Juan Chama project. Half the time there's some. All depends what the flow is, but the bypass flows are always maintained. So again, we just divert whatever's above that. And I have these same things for all three. This is Little Navajo, and you see if I go back, these are all on the same scale. So number one, going from Navajo to Little Navajo, you have way less water in the system in the first place. And then Little Navajo has pretty high bypass flows. So you can see basically August, September, there's never any water coming through Little Navajo. And there's the third one to round it out of Rio Blanco, where the bypass flows are more often lower than kind of the median flows. I didn't mention the black line in the middle is the median historical flows there. Okay, so if you add up all those three basins together, this is and roll it up into total annual flow. This is what it looks like, total flow in the tributaries. And this is an annual time series, and the black solid line in there is like a trailing 20-year average. So you can see the flows fluctuate fairly drastically year to year, and it's kind of hard to see the trends in there. But if you look at that solid black line, you can see that the trend has drifted down from 200,000 acre feet down to more like 150,000 acre feet in the rivers. So let's get back to these bypass flows. This is what that annual flow looks like, about how the total water in the system is apportioned into the San Juan Chama diversion, which is the dark blue fill at the top, and the bypass flows, which are the lighter blue at the bottom. There's a little bit of a nuance here, and that is the intermediate blues. So the dark blue, the medium blue at the bottom, the bypass flows, the bypass flows, that would be if the San Juan Chama project were 100% efficient. And what do I mean by that? I mean the bypass flows, if it calls for 20 CFS on a given day, it would be 20.0 CFS all the time. Practically speaking, it's a minimum 20 CFS bypass flow, and it's pretty hard to get 20.0. So the reclamation errors on the safe side, and it's oftentimes, I think it's within a CFS usually, but that all adds up. So you can see recently in the last decade, there is a little bit of additional bypass flow, as I'm calling here. But what also jumps out to me is the period of the 80s. In the 80s, Heron was full, and that water that the project could have taken was not actually taken. So, I think that's all I have to say about that one. Okay, so getting back to sort of that trend line, you combine the last two slides, and what you see is that in the gray line in the middle there, I should say, I've now moved things to a percentage, sort of normalized the bypass flows. This is a way of comparing two numbers that might be on a little bit different scale. So I'm comparing the bypass flows and the diversions to their average from 1974 to 1999. So because those bypass flows, if I go back a slide here, you can see that, again, it varies so much year to year. It's kind of hard to see the trends, which is why we look at these averages. But you can see that the bypass flows in this century from 2000 on have really stayed pretty much constant. But the blue line, the dark blue, our actual diversions, have been declining at a faster rate. And that's what this slide is intended to show. The dark blue line at the bottom is the sort of trailing 20-year average of San Juan Chama diversions. The gray line in the middle is the trailing average of total flow available, and the lighter blue line is the trailing average of bypass flows. So all of the flows have been reduced in the system this century, but the San Juan Chama project flows, diversions, have been reduced by significantly more than the bypass flows. So not only are we subject to this drought and reduced flows, but because of the bypass requirements, the San Juan Chama project has been hit harder than most other areas. So let's take a look a little bit deeper here in what's happening now on the other side of the tunnel. So I'm going to start with the actual diversions in this century, so the millennial drought since 2000. These are just a bar chart showing the annual flows out of Azotea Tunnel. And again, they fluctuate, but you can compare them to this black dash line, which is how much we would need to get full San Juan Chama allocations for our contractors. So what's happening in the difference between those two lines? Well, in most years, we've been taking water out of storage. That's all the solid yellow below the black line. And as has been shown, like from 2000 to 2012, San Juan Chama contractors got the full allocation every year, even though there wasn't the inflow to support that. So that meant water was coming out of storage. There's a few years, only I guess 6 of them there, that have had more water than is needed for a full allocation. So those would be where water's added to storage. So fairly logical to look at this and see what's happened with storage, which I've overlaid on the top here. So that storage line has really plummeted. We've gone from having a full reservoir at the end of the century to basically an empty reservoir now. As the reservoir is emptied out and we've pulled water out of storage to allocate to the contractors, we've added another piece here, and that's the shortages to make up the rest of the differences. So if you take all of this information here and combine it and look cumulatively through time, now I'm looking at total flow of each of those sources from 2000 to present, you can see that this dash line, we've had enough water to meet, I don't know what that number is over there, maybe 80%-ish of the total allocation, but we've also pulled 350,000 acre feet out of storage in order to meet those allocations. And the shortages are that little red sliver up there. So although we've been having shortages for the last 8-9 years, it's a tiny amount relative to how much we've taken out of storage. So put differently, if we didn't have any storage on this system, our shortages probably would have been, about 4 times what they've actually been. So, excuse me. So this plot, it again shows kind of these bands, but what I'm showing here is comparing what these flows were to what our planning, 10-ish years ago showed that the flows might be. So these are
what's called the CMIP-3 projections, and they've been around for a while, and that's what the city of Santa Fe's most recent round of planning was based on. So this is the same format of chart that I showed before, where that dark blue band represents half of all the flows, except this time we're not talking about historical flows, we're talking about climate change projections. And so that's a range of different models and of different emissions scenarios. So it turns out, actually, we're not doing that. It's not that much different than what our planning science has suggested. If I go back, just to be really clear about what this is, you can see that we have the same black dash line here, and we have the blue line of what the inflow was. And that blue line now turns orange here, so you can see where it lies in there. Basically, we're at about the 25th percentile. So big question is that climate change? Is it drought? Is it both? You know, what do we expect moving forward? But I will just pause and say that Bill Schneider will be talking about sort of these CMIP-3 projections were used to inform our plans, and we collaborated with Reclamation on the Santa Fe Basin study, and there was a recommended project that Bill is going to talk about reusing and fully consuming our San Juan Chama water. And so the science seems to be working, but when we project it out all the way, this is kind of the same plot, looking out to the end of the century, you know, if we continue at the 25th percentile, we're looking at about 65% of San Juan Chama water available. If we're looking at the median, it's more like 80%, maybe it's 90%. But again, this is now getting to be a little bit dated science. There's been new climate projections that have come out, CMIP-5, CMIP-6. And so where are we going from here? While we're pursuing this project of fully consumptively using our San Juan Chama water, we're already beginning our next cycle of planning to figure out what we need to do after that at the city of Santa Fe. So specific to climate, I think Bill will touch a little more broadly about our next round of planning. But specific to the climate projections, we're again collaborating with Reclamation in conjunction with the Rio Grande Basin study. Reclamation is working with UMass Amherst on hydrology projections, and Casey Brown is the lead on that side, and he's sort of somewhat of a thought leader in decision making under deep uncertainty. And what we're going to get is something it's not actually going to be CMIP-5 or CMIP-6. We're real excited about this. This might actually be something even more valuable to us. What we'll be able to do is kind of pick a temperature and a precipitation future and be able to see what happens. And that'll allow us to go outside of the bounds of CMIP-5 and CMIP-6 to really test what might break our system. So we're really thinking long-term, future, and what's next. So that's it. I'm ready to stand for questions.
Hello, here's Runwei from New Mexico State University. Thank you so much for your presentation. From your presentation, I can tell that like a city of Santa Fe, or maybe the whole state of New Mexico, is facing a huge ongoing water shortage. So, do you like at the city level, the government or like the decision makers have any plans for the usage of reclaiming the water or alternative water resources? Thank you.
Yeah, the simple answer is yes, and that's what Bill is going to be talking about in the next slide, is what our immediate plans are for reusing the San Juan Chama water. And it sort of gets to Grace's question earlier about when Kyle was talking about, okay, what are we doing about this? And you know, it's kind of hard to do anything on the San Juan Chama side itself. You saw it's like pretty efficient on the diversions. There's legal structures in place. It ultimately filters down to the contractors to figure out what are we going to do with less water moving forward. And as has been sort of the recurring themes, both in Colorado River,
here today. It's reuse the water, diversify the water supply portfolio, and so that's what we're doing.
Thanks, Steve. Would you mind saying just a little something about the thought that you've given to layering in the institutional potential shortages and uncertainty on this system?
We're thinking hard about that. Yeah, so the question Jesse's asking is, I started the premise of this whole slideshow is what are the current rules of the system? And as I said, it's maybe climate in the future will have a big year where we'll be bumping up against the 270,000 limit. I don't even know what the number is because we're not even anywhere near it. But I boiled it down to one simple rule: is we have the bypass flows. But yeah, we at the city are actively looking at the Colorado River system as a whole and how all the negotiations currently may ultimately impact us. So we're looking at various scenarios on the Colorado River and sort of potential delivery requirements from the San Juan River, and what is the likelihood that it might propagate up to additional shortages on the San Juan Chama project. And it gets to be something that's a little bit hard to quantify. I like to quantify things. This gets a little bit looser, but it's still something that can be quantified, at least conceptually. And so it remains to be seen how it plays out in our next water plan, but we will have something in our next water plan about more than just hydrologic shortages, institutional shortages, if you will, or Colorado River water sharing shortages.
Hey, Steve, thank you for the presentation. That's actually, I hadn't seen that analysis of those individual diversions in quite a while, and seeing those extended out was really interesting. But I was going to mention, for my career piece there in that 40-year time period, the thing that is remarkable in that for me to realize, we're hearing, now we're in the Southwest in a 1,000-year dry period, right? And we see that with your 25th percentile type flows, or if you go further downstream in the Rio Grande, maybe 10th percentile, really very, very dry, right? But the 1980s, when I came to New Mexico, was a 1,000-year wet period. No matter what lines we draw in here, they're going to go down, right, between those two extremes. For your future analyses, are you going to be looking at longer time periods that try to get at this kind of full or half cycle of hydrology we see in the Southwest of 50 to 70 years from wet to wet?
That's a good question. It's a great question, and yeah, looking at that in the 1980s there on that plot where I was showing the potential bypass flows versus the actual bypass flows makes me think of the book The Emerald Mile, which I'm sure a lot of you have read, and a lot of that additional bypass flows help that guy float down the river and have a lot of
yes,
fun.
sir. Cochiti Reservoir was within a few inches of having uncontrolled spill into the middle Rio Grande. I mean, same thing was happening here as on the Colorado in those time periods. It's just amazingly wet.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing to think about, and ultimately, we are not doing the science of the hydrology projections ourselves. Number one, we don't have the expertise, the resources to do that, and we also for our customers, we want to be using the best available science done independently, and nobody's going to trust that I'm doing the best available science. Like, we got to go to the experts on this stuff. And with that, it's a good question, and I think I'm not sure what these latest, I haven't honestly looked at the CMIP 5 and the CMIP 6 data sets, because to my understanding, they haven't been processed all the way through to San Juan Chama allocation. So we're going to use this other tool, which I didn't actually dive into it that much. I could go back to that slide here. It's pretty cool. They have a weather generator, a stochastic weather generator. So this is within each temperature and precip assumption you make. It can spit out 100 different traces, whatever you want, of that particular temperature and precip. And so if it's a good model, it should actually replicate those wet and dry. And it's a really good question. I hope we'll take a look at the results once we have it, and I guess maybe be a little skeptical if there aren't some big wet cycles in there. But in the end, we can't get allocated more than 96,200 a year for the whole project. So we are thinking we're thinking statewide, we're thinking regional, but ultimately our job is with the city. And so for our planning perspective, we're probably not going to have any scenario where we're assuming we're getting more than our allocation. Maybe that water will go down to the Colorado River again, and maybe Powell will overflow again. Wouldn't that be something?
Hi, Steve. Laurel Locker from Tucson, Arizona. I just wanted to ask, what's the future of Heron Lake, and how far down will you continue to draw it, or is there some limit besides dead pool? And then secondly, what's the city of Santa Fe doing about the repercussions of all of this cutback from the San Juan Chama project on groundwater around the city?
Yeah, so the first question, I would have to defer to Carolyn about that, but I will make a note that storage plot is a little bit, there's some stuff behind the scenes on that. That's actual storage, but then it gets really confusing to tease out how much is in the federal pool. So the federal pool at the beginning of this year had exactly 0 water in it. All of that water, when I showed there's 50,000 acre feet at the end of 2022, that was all contractor water. That's for the most part Albuquerque's water, our water, and others. So given the nature of how Carolyn explained the waivers and how you can keep your water in there till the next year, I don't anticipate it's beneficial to us as contractors to leave the water in Heron since we don't suffer the evaporative losses. So I wouldn't anticipate going down to dead pool ever. In regards to what Santa Fe is doing with respect to groundwater, my background, I'm a hydrogeologist, a groundwater person, and I'm so excited. I've been there for 2 years now and really excited for a deep dive on the groundwater and integrating that into our long-range plan to know that we're going to need our groundwater source. We're not, we have Bill will talk more about supply sources, but we have our historical original supply was the Santa Fe watershed sitting above town. We're planning for not if that burns, we're planning for when that burns. And we're planning for, possibly 10 years of having that water supply not available. So our groundwater will be used during that time. So my charge at the city is to increase our understanding of the sustainable yield of the aquifers and be able to manage the aquifers, not just to 2100, but forever in a way that we rest the aquifer when the surface water is available. And then when these climate catastrophes like fire happen, that we can meet all of our customers' demand with the groundwater. And so it'll be like really low groundwater usage, maybe a decade or however long of really high groundwater usage, back to low groundwater usage, such that if you cycle that forever, we're within a sustainable yield of the aquifer. That's our goal. Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name's John Romero. I'm with the Office of the State Engineer. I'm the Water Resource Allocation Program Director and the Water Rights Director. And I'm going to be introducing our next speaker, Mr. Bill Schneider. He's already up here. And he's with the City of Santa Fe, and he's going to be presenting on the San Juan Chama Return Flow Project that they're working on. A little bit about Bill. Yeah. Bill has 30 years of experience practicing in the field of geohydrology and sustainable water resource management, with emphasis in conjunctive surface and groundwater management strategies, utilizing integrated GIS-based data management and modeling techniques. It's a lot. He holds a bachelor's in geology from the University of Miami, Maine, Farmington, and a master's in hydrogeology from Temple University. He completed postgraduate courses in environmental engineering at Drexel University and is a registered professional geologist in Pennsylvania. Please welcome Bill.
Thank you, John. Really appreciate it, and it's great to see that many of the young students are still hanging in there. In fact, I want to just introduce the team that I work with because these types of efforts require a lot of collaboration. So from the City of Santa Fe side, we have Walker, Francesca, you just met Steve, and also Jesse. And so for the young people in the audience, please, during break, reach out and speak with them. They're really smart, but also very engaging, and you could definitely learn a lot from them. I know I have. So I'm going to speak to you a bit of a specific project that sort of got driven by a lot of these challenges that we've been sort of discussing today, which is reduced flows in the rivers in response to severe drought. So the title of this talk is basically how Santa Fe is building greater climate resiliency through water reuse. And the interesting thing, when we think of the perspective of climate change, many of us are thinking far out, like Steve was showing, 2040. Santa Fe is going to model our future out hydrologically to 2100. But the reality is, as Steve demonstrated, we're sort of feeling some very drastic reductions in hydrology and water availability since 1999. So for these young students, what you're inheriting, and that very brave gal that came up and said, listen, this is a lot of information, distill it. What I would share is that we have made promises for water availability that we're learning simply was based on undefendably unsound science. And now basically we're learning is that we have to provide additional waters to enhance sort of economic values, not only for the municipalities, cities, tribal nations, big part of this, but also the environmental needs, as well to try to maintain cultural and traditional water uses. So young crowd here, please continue this trend because we have a lot of challenges we're leaving you to be fixed. All right, so I want to hit on a couple of key things. Santa Fe's water supply and some of our demand projections. And then really I want to hit on a key point, again, feeling like we're living in climate change now, our system vulnerabilities. And it's not just drought, which I'll show here in a minute. And then I want to specifically touch about what we're calling a mitigation or a remedy to that shortage through a project that's basically fundamentally a water reuse project. It's a pretty simple project, yet most of the challenges come around actually getting it permitted and built. And then just a couple just sort of forward-thinking discussions. Steve really did a great job hitting on those, but where we're going in the future as a city for a sustainable water supply. So we call this our helicopter view, and I hope you can see it in the back, but it's basically an aerial view of the city of Santa Fe's water supply footprint. Okay, and so Steve alluded to that we have 4 primary sources of water. The main one historically was always the Santa Fe River, which is a small tributary to the Rio Grande, and it's ephemeral. It's not even year to year, even without dams, a perennial system. In the 1950s, during the severe drought, a series of water wells were installed in the city limits, called the city well field. So all the water source that met Santa Fe's needs up through 1970 were met by the Santa Fe River watershed. Now, what has since happened, and you see this in many Western cities, is that the footprint expands out beyond sort of the limits. And in the 1970s, the city built the Buckman well field. So, excuse me. And so what was key there, that well field was originally designed, they're deep wells that were installed along the Rio Grande with the intention of pumping water, bring it into the city for potable use, and trying to intercept water from the Rio Grande that the city can then offset those depletions, those impacts from those pumping wells on surface water using its San Juan Chama water. So effectively, if we had an impact of a number, say 1,000 acre feet, just as a random number, we would pay that water back through releases of our San Juan Chama water. And that was a valiant attempt at trying to sort of achieve a way to utilize the city's allocation. But due to very complex hydrology, which I'll touch on a little bit more here in a minute, that was fairly unsuccessful. So in 2011, the city with the Santa Fe County built what's called the Buckman Direct Diversion. And that was designed specifically to take water directly out of the Rio Grande, and in the city's case, to access our San Juan Chama water. Is there anything else? No. Okay. So I like this figure. It's another way to sort of describe what I just stated, which is it's a 100-year record of the city's production. Now I want to caution, not depletion, simply the water that was produced and used for potable needs. Now, and this graphic has those four colors. It basically shows on the x-axis is production, and it was growing exponentially from the 1920s all the way up through 1995. And that was the peak maximum of about 13,400 acre feet. And basically at that point, the city acquired the water system, made enormous investments in water conservation. And in the process of doing that, and you could sort of see the peak in 1995, since that time, we've driven our production down to about 8,800. So about a 35% reduction, even though the population has been increasing, right? And we see this throughout the West. It's a success. But one of the key things that Steve alluded to, we've had a paradigm shift. In the 1980s and, well, mostly in the 1990s, we were over pumping the aquifers, and we were actually seeing subsidence and some damage to some of the water wells. It was unsustainable. And as a result, the city worked with its partners and built this Buckman Direct Diversion. And now we've transformed where in the 90s we were using up to 80% of our supply as groundwater. Now we've flip-flopped it, and we're predominantly about 80% using surface water. And we've been resting our wells to sort of use the aquifer as a reservoir for times of drought or need. And so this is a graphic sort of on the left. It sort of highlights New Mexico relative to other Western states in water use, residential water use. And we use a term for it's called the GPCD, or gallon per capita per day. And on the right, it compares Santa Fe to other New Mexico cities of similar size systems. And we're at a GPCD of around 88. You know, we make an enormous investment to conservation. So one of the questions we're asking, and this is one of the challenges, is how low can you go in the realm of water conservation? Since about 2015, I wouldn't say we're plateauing, but definitely our trajectory is getting flatter. So we're doing a very strong in-house look using new technologies. We signed on to the Colorado River Water Users MOU with the intention of trying to find new ways to continue to keep that downward trend. And so how far can we go is one of the sort of questions we're asking in terms of the best available science and technology. Technology is going to be key. And this slide sort of illustrates, and I like it on many realms, although it also in some respects can be embarrassing, is it shows similar to the previous slide, it shows our production since in this case 1950 and that continuous increase, and then in 1995 it shows the decline. And now we're building sort of mathematical models to project the demand into the future. And so this figure illustrates some past water planning studies that were done in Santa Fe that shows projections that in hindsight or retrospect were basically very non-conservative, I guess. They were showing much greater demand for water than it's actually happened. We overestimated demand, and that's a good thing, right? And we've planned around that. But we can no longer do that because building new projects like I'm going to describe is very expensive. So we're hoping, and it's hard for me to see this, but we'll be basically continuing our downward projections in terms of demand down through about 2030 roughly, which, again, I think we can achieve that. So I want to come back to this figure, the helicopter view of Santa Fe and those four sources. And one of the things, we think of climate change, but again, this past 20 years, I feel like has already been a litmus test in many respects. But I want to talk about water supply vulnerability and the concern of catastrophic disruption of water supply sources, and then potentially mitigation measures to remedy that. And so I'm illustrating again those 4 sources, and I'll start with the Santa Fe watershed, and then work through them, just to kind of give you a flavor on sort of where many Western cities already are relative to climate impacts. All right, so this is a view looking up the Santa Fe River, and what you're going to see is a very pristine watershed. But it's also heavily forested. And although the city has spent, I think, close to now roughly $2 million doing forest mitigation work, mostly thinning, some controlled burns, and trying to improve habitat, but also reduce fire risk around our reservoirs, it's only been such a small footprint that we've been able to actually treat for all the challenges associated with burns, as anyone that's familiar with the Calf Creek Hermit's Peak fire can be quite a challenge. And so Santa Fe is also challenged by the whole ring around that watershed is wilderness area. You can't even do mechanical thinning in there. So there's really not a whole lot of ability for us to really reduce fire risk, or it's going to be quite a bit of an effort. So one of the things that we're doing is pivoting towards sort of pre and post-fire mitigation efforts. And that, again, could mean fire treatment of the forest like we're doing now, although at a very slow pace. And then one of the things we've been exploring with USGS and the Forest Service is modeling sort of the ability to predict where expected burn severities ranges are and where the highly likelihood or high probability for debris flows, and even looking at volumetrics of where these debris from a fire will come channeling down into the river and ultimately clogging and filling our reservoir probably multiple times. And Steve hit on this, and this comes to like the most important thing for this next generation is how do we react? How do we provide safe and reliable water when you potentially have these catastrophic events? And, we're sort of anticipating that in the case of the Santa Fe watershed, we're overdue for a very large fire. So pivoting to those city wells, again, the 1950s, they were drilled during a time of emergency. The 1950s drought was very severe. And I'm just showing you the map of the city, okay? And now I'm going to pivot towards another risk and vulnerability, water quality. We're in a capital city. It's developed. Through time, we've had gas stations, dry cleaners. And so what this graphic illustrates is we have a numerical model of groundwater flow. And these blue halos that hopefully you can see represent the zone of influence of those pumping wells. So we run those wells to serve our customers, and they're pulling water in from what's called an area of recharge. We are riddled with known and suspected areas of contamination. It's just the reality we face. And so how do we operate our system in such a way, Steve used the word sustainability, we're mapping the fluid pressures in the aquifer, sampling water quality, trying to better understand responses so that we can prevent pulling that contamination into our water wells. So you would think out with the Buckman well field, which is out along the Rio Grande, we'd be free and clear. It's forest land, it's BLM land, there's not any development, well, with one exception, right? So upstream of the Buckman, or the upgradient of the Buckman well field, I don't have a pointer, but I'll just explain it, is a small little area known as the Los Alamos National Laboratory. And Los Alamos, or LANL, has many known zones of contamination that are being worked on, and they're doing, a lot of work. But the reality is this chromium plume that maybe some have read in the paper sits up on a hill with a strong hydraulic gradient that's towards those Buckman wells. And that plume is not defined right now. We don't know the extent of it. So it's a risk. And then moving to our newest water supply source, and in some ways maybe our most important, because it does tag this Colorado River water supply, San Juan Chama, is a picture here at our diversion of the Rio Grande. So not even thinking of contamination, hopefully you can see from this graphic, it is a muddy river. It is really challenging to bring that water to drinking water standards. And we struggle with the technology available to remove that sediment in a cost-effective and energy-efficient way. And it poses a lot of risk because, once again, with Los Alamos, radionuclides travel through what's called colloidal transport. You know, those particles, they adhere to soil and organic particles, and they travel along the river. So when you have high turbidity conditions, sometimes we simply, out of safety, have to shut down the plant. Which then leads me to, if many were around in 2013, the Cerro Grande fire. And if anyone has cleaned a chimney, like you get that black soot and that black ash, it wreaks havoc and it's hard to get out. And trust me, it does some damage to filters. So one of the things that we're trying to do with respect to our water supply is build some greater resiliency to all these risks and vulnerability: water quality, drought, fire. And then, of course, long-term projections, as Steve hit on, so I won't really touch on this, but it's climate change variability. There's just simply going to be years where we're going to have little to no surface water. So our intentions are to build a groundwater reserve. So a lot of thanks and appreciation if anyone's back here from Reclamation, of all this technical expertise that we've received over the years, and funding for that matter. And we've worked with them to do a basin study, and that explored looking at climate impacts to Santa Fe's water supply, moving out 40 years to 2040 in this case, and trying to develop methodologies to mitigate those shortages through what's called adaptation strategies. That led to a Title 16 feasibility study where we explored all sorts of alternatives focused on reuse of treated effluent. And for the young audience, that means wastewater. Okay, we explored everything from taking wastewater and drinking it directly, direct potable, to indirect potable, to putting that water in the ground through injection, aquifer storage, and recovery. We even explored options of pumping that water all the way up to the Santa Fe River reservoirs. Multitude of scenarios. We did a triple bottom line analysis, a lot of rigor, a lot of good science and engineering, and we landed on a project. And that project was accepted and funded. The federal government's a 25% partner on this project. To date, we've received $6 million and hope in the next funding cycle to get up to about 10 to 12. All right, so now I'm to the project. A lot of background, and I'm gonna check for time here. So this project is really driven by reclaiming water for reuse, okay? Fundamentally, it's only focused on reclaiming the San Juan Chama portion of our effluent. Very critical, important piece to note. So what it would do for us in reclaiming that water is provide us a fifth source of supply, and it's going to help us alleviate and back off of groundwater pumping to reserve groundwater for future need in times of severe catastrophic disruptions like a large forest fire in the watershed. One of the best aspects and why this project scored so highly, it's utilizing the $350 million investment the city and county made to build the Buckman direct diversion. So this, to me, is effectively a BDD amendment, right? This is sort of how this project, I view it. And I view it also as an indirect potable, and I'm going to explain that here in a minute. And then to many in the audience, the state in particular, and MRGCD, if anyone's out there, by us creating this new source of water supply, it's going to allow us to limit the amount of times that we're acquiring native Rio Grande water rights in the Middle Valley and transferring up to city of Santa Fe for potable use. So this is that big debate, ag versus muni. And so ultimately what we're trying to achieve is a little bit greater balance in the system. So what does it look like for Santa Fe? So this figure is called the sand key. And so the big circle shows the scale, and it's based on an average of the past 7 years of our demand, the water we're producing. And we're roughly about 8,600, 8,700 acre feet a year. But what's really interesting, and again, for the young audience, is this thing called consumption or depletion, is the city only depletes about 3,300 acre feet. Think how small that is relative to, on average, generally speaking, about 1 million acre feet flows past Ottawa Gauge on the Rio Grande. This is sort of, in some respects, like kind of a flea on the behind of an elephant, right? It's a small amount of water, and yet we're continuing to try to reduce our demand. It's the right thing to do to be a good stakeholder and a good neighbor. But what's very interesting is that a large portion of this water, about on an annual basis, 66% of it, comes back through our sewers into the wastewater plant. We view that under the one water principle as a source of water supply. The question is how to achieve that in a cost-effective and safe manner. So this is basically the project, and it's so ridiculously simple, I'm almost embarrassed to be up here and explaining it. We call for San Juan Chama water out of Abiquiu. It comes down the Rio Grande, and we divert it at the Buckman Direct Diversion. And ultimately, we bring it up through a series of infrastructure. We remove the sediment, and then basically, if you can see the graphic at figure 4, we bring it to a water plant, and that's basically where we do all sorts of treatment to bring it to drinking water. That muddy river, that earlier picture, is now basically, looks like this, right? Then we bring it into the city for use, but now it's blended and mixed with our other 3 sources, and it runs through our city, and then ultimately 1/3 of it is lost to outdoor watering or leaks, what have you, but 2/3 of it runs to the sewer and ends, which I guess would be bullet 7 here, the Paseo Real plant. At that plant, we do 3 things, okay? We treat that water, but we have 3 places to put it. We do non-potable irrigation, mostly turf, soccer fields, golf. We also have made a commitment, and this is really important again to the young audience, of satisfying the needs of the environment. The city has committed to keep non-San Juan Chama water in the Santa Fe River for environmental and cultural uses. Very key. And then thirdly, the Colorado River source, we are intending to build a pipeline, and so this purple line, if you follow the purple arrows, goes right past the Buckman Direct Diversion Treatment Plant. The vision someday is maybe we will treat it using that technology to drinking water right there. For the current future, our intention is to bring that water back to the Rio Grande and conduct an exchange so that we can bring that water back up and reuse it. And our intent, and so basically where the influent is at the BDD and where this outfall is going to be within 500,000 feet. There's no intervening users. So we view this as a low impact in terms of water right questions on the river. So in simple cartoon terms, we call for water, which is that red line, and we divert it at the BDD and we bring that to the city of Santa Fe. That's all San Juan Chama water. So now we're posing the question, this project is, what if we return the portion of our wastewater effluent back to the BDD with this project, the return flow pipeline? And so what it effectively does is build sort of like a do loop. And this is why I call it indirect potable. We're basically doing this exchange, and what we're doing is creating the environmental buffer that has really caused challenges in the realm of direct potable throughout the country. All you have to do is look at Cloudcroft, which is exploring reverse osmosis technology to treat their water. It's very energy intensive and very expensive. So I just hit the wrong button here. All right, excuse me a sec. Okay, so basically, and I did not mention, this is the most key point of this figure, is basically we want to get credit, return flow credits for that water return to the Rio Grande so that we could effectively have a like amount. What that'll allow us to do, and this graphic sort of built to illustrate, is call for less water. That basically our diversion, the SJC in the river, plus the return of unconsumed SJC is equal to the total diversion. So, this sounds so simple. It's basically a pipe, right? Like, why is this thing not built yet? So, and this is the stuff that keeps me up late at night, and I'm hoping I'm not handing this off to the young audience that we'll get this done. But regulatory framework, right? So basically, and I didn't set a timer. How am I doing on time? Is there anyone? 3 minutes over? Okay, thank you. So basically, with respect to the regulatory framework, it's a federal project. We have to go through the NEPA. We have to follow the jurisdiction and the rules of the state engineer's office, And we're basically have filed a return flow application to get their credits if this project is built. And one of the biggest challenges, we have 3 federal agencies that we're working with, but we feel like there's precedent for this project. This is very unique in many respects, but also so simple, I can't see where we wouldn't get it done. Now, the other piece is anytime you move water around in New Mexico, there's going to be resistance. And we have people that have gotten very used to having that wastewater going down the Santa Fe River. We have environmental concerns, cultural concerns, and water quality concerns have come up. And so we're working with the stakeholders in the community to sort of achieve and address some of those issues. And then thankfully, Steve hit on sort of our next steps, which we're using a GoldSim modeling tool to build a decision analysis framework to look at various adaptations so that basically once this pipeline is built, we can start pivoting towards a more optimal sort of management of our existing sources. There's no more trans-mountain diversions. We have to work within the framework we have. And so with that, I will stand for questions.
Let's see. Are there any questions from the audience? We probably have time for one quick question here to keep ourselves on track.
I purposely went late so I wouldn't have to answer questions.
Hi. So just a quick question. So following the Hermit's Peak Calf Canyon fire, we saw the city of Las Vegas struggle greatly with their water source and specifically their infrastructure for their surface water. So it looks like the city of Santa Fe is planning obviously alternative sources and groundwater primarily being that source in San Juan Chama. But is the city of Santa Fe thinking about, from an infrastructure perspective, the filtration and the things that are required to upgrade a plant in order to treat that water coming off a watershed post-fire in those conditions?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. And even to build upon that, like the challenge with Las Vegas, not to speak for Vegas, but is also their groundwater system could not meet demand by itself, right? So they don't have the redundancy that Santa Fe is fortunate to have. Answer your question is we are doing a lot of forest treatment work around our infrastructure to try to prevent any immediate catastrophic loss of a plant, storage tanks, what have you. We're also trying to reduce the severity of fire within the watershed. We're doing some expansion on some of our treatment processes to be able to handle a higher sediment load. But then one of the things that Jesse's leading up is also sort of this post-fire mitigation, but putting it in prior to the fire. These geobrugs, these jetty jacks, these technologies that are simple but are designed to try to prevent debris from clogging reservoirs. It's a monumental effort. I don't know if we'll achieve it, but we're working with the Army Corps of Engineers right now trying to at least explore the feasibility of that type of technology. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. It is my pleasure to introduce Kate Lacey, who's here from the New Mexico Environment Department. As the River Stewardship Program Coordinator in the Surface Water Quality Bureau at the NMED, Kate manages an array of responsibilities aimed at safeguarding New Mexico's surface water quality. This is a good bio. Okay. She currently manages the River Stewardship Program, where she oversees multiple funding sources totaling about $20 million. To facilitate contracts and projects dedicated to improving surface water quality and riparian ecosystems across New Mexico. Welcome, Kate.
Hello. All right. Let's find this. Oh, this is a fun clicker. All right. So today I'm going to chat about the water quality and riparian restoration projects in the San Juan Chama watersheds from the water, kind of more of the water quality standpoint. So kind of pivoting here from a quantity perspective. First I want to start off with a little bit about the funding from the New Mexico Environment Department. Specifically in the non-point source management program, we have two sources of funding, well, multiple, but two main sources here, the Clean Water Act Section 319 funding and the River Stewardship Program funding is available for both planning and for projects that enhance the health of surface waters by addressing the root causes of poor water quality and stream habitat. So this Clean Water Act Section 319 funds specifically, we have funds for implementation projects as well as funds for planning projects, so watershed-based plans as approved by the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA. And so those specifically, the EPA accepted plans are required for project funding, and that's a major difference between the two funding sources. So under the Clean Water Act Section 319, there's also quality assurance project protection plans required for projects, and that process looks more like a request for applications, solicitation for applications process. So they're both competitive. The River Stewardship Program specifically is a state-funded program that has multiple funding sources, and it's all for implementation of projects to improve surface water quality and river habitat. So projects should be supported by planning documents, local planning documents, state planning documents, kind of what is available. There's no QUAP specifically required for the projects, and the process is competitive through a request for proposals process, which I'll get back to at the end of this presentation. So with over about 45% of New Mexico's assessed, keyword there, surface waters in listed as impaired, and increasing demands for clean water and increasing stressors related to climate change, there's an abundant need for NMED and many organizations to conduct river habitat improvement projects. So that's just a bit about the funding. I'm going to move to now talking about the watersheds pieces. So the San Juan watershed, this is a look at the northwest corner of the state, as we've seen many maps this morning. Where the Animas, La Plata, and meet the San Juan River. So on this map, you'll see there's some purple triangles and some yellow circles. The purple triangles specifically are showing past and currently funded Clean Water Act Section 319 projects that are occurring, mostly on the Animas and the San Juan River. And then we have River Stewardship Program projects also in this watershed. One just a past project just below Navajo Dam, and another in the Farmington area. So these projects, I'll highlight this one down just below Navajo Dam. This one was completed a few years ago, but here we'll zoom into that one. So the San Juan River Restoration Project occurred approximately from March 2015 to June 2018. So this project restored 4 miles of riverbank along the San Juan River below Navajo Dam. As part of this restoration, they did 73 acres of riparian area, including invasive species and removal of Russian olive and salt cedar, and a total of 258 acres of riparian area that were revegetated with native grasses and cottonwoods and willows. So the goal of this project overall was to improve the riparian area and mitigate the threats of wildfire caused by high densities of those invasive species growing into that area and overtaking that canopy at the river. So they were to remove these on this reach below the San Juan River below Navajo Dam, and just above the reaches with various water quality impairments, which I'll touch on next. So additionally, this work was restoring native riparian species, helped to protect the water quality, and protect the established trout fishery that was used as a refuge for fish because of degraded water quality downstream. So this project had kind of multiple benefits to it. So NMED had awarded $331,000 in River Stewardship Program funds to the San Juan Soil and Water Conservation District to complete this project between March 2015 and June of 2018. So we'll take a look at the impairments on the San Juan. So this map you're looking at is a series of red lines on the map depicting the stream segments that have been assessed and have water quality impairments. So impairments means that the stream segment is not meeting water quality standards set by the designated uses for that stream segment. So that may be one use or multiple uses depending on what the water quality impairment is. So streams may have multiple designated uses. Each set of designated uses has a set of water quality standards assigned to it. So the Surface Water Quality Bureau with an Environment Department has a rotating monitoring schedule of all the watersheds in New Mexico to monitor surface water quality and see if the surface waters are meeting those water quality standards for their designated uses. So this next map is going to be my crude way of trying to easily show the impairments. It was an attempt, so you can. It's a little bit of paint, but the so on each of the stream and lake segments in the San Juan watershed, you can see on this map. So where there were red lines, that's basically where I've painted over to try to demonstrate or depict some of these specific water quality impairments to tell this story. And then just below Navajo Lake, which is the red reach in the far right corner of this map, with the yellow dot below it, there's a stretch below Navajo Dam that is not impaired, has no impairments, so that is left untouched. So basically in this watershed on the San Juan River below Canyon Largo, there are water quality impairments for sedimentation and siltation, and then E. coli below the confluence of the La Plata River. The reach of the San Juan River below Navajo Lake to Canyon Largo has, again, no water quality impairments and is meeting its water quality standards for designated uses, which include high quality cold water aquatic life, irrigation, livestock watering, primary contact, and wildlife habitat. So that reach, although I have not physically been there myself, I've heard wonderful things about it. It's quite beautiful, and it is a quite pristine trout fishery. So the Animas River, which is the stretch kind of coming where you see La Plata County listed on the map, that is has a temperature impairment from the Colorado border and all the way to the confluence of the San Juan. It's not meeting its water quality standards for cool water aquatic life designated use. The northern assessment of the Animas River, where you can kind of see all of the bunch of lines up to the Colorado border, that is impaired for temperature, turbidity, nutrients, total phosphorus, and lead for that cool water aquatic life designated use. So this is kind of the overview of the San Juan watershed and what's going on there from a water quality perspective. So I'm going to hop over to the Chama to chat about that for a minute. So the impairments, so this is the same style map, but now we're looking at the Rio Chama from about the Colorado border, just all the way down to the bottom of the map where you see Abiquiu Reservoir in red at the bottom. So the top of the map, Colorado is just north of that. The city of Chama, or village of Chama rather, is just below that top of the map border. So again, on this map you see there's some blue lines and some red lines. The red lines are stream segments that do have water quality impairments, and the blue lines do not in this area. So we'll also on this map, you'll notice that there's a lot less projects located. So there's one purple triangle on the Rio Nutrias, just if you're looking at the map, east of El Vado, and then one yellow circle. Well, there's really two, the other one's in the Rio Grande Basin, but the yellow circle just to the southeast of the purple triangle is on Canjilon Creek, which drains to Abiquiu Reservoir. So we'll talk about those as well. So the impairments going on in the Chama, it's a little bit different color map story. So the lakes, specifically, Heron Lake has an impairment for temperature, and Abiquiu Lake has impairments for mercury and PCBs. Specifically, there's a fish consumption advisory there. So the Rio Chama is impaired, and many of its tributaries are impaired for temperature from the Colorado border to about the El Vado Reservoir. So I will focus and kind of zoom in on the two stream segments where the projects were on the bottom half of the map. So The Rio Nutrias, the stream segment shown in the greens on the map, is not fully supporting its high-quality cold water aquatic life designated use because of turbidity impairment, and not fully supporting the primary contact designated use because of an E. coli impairment. Next, the Canjilon Creek stream reach above Abiquiu Lake, which has many colors, looks kind of like a rainbow on the map, is not fully supporting its high-quality cold water aquatic life designated use because of turbidity, nutrients, specific conductance, and temperature impairments. So basically, because there's only 2 projects on this map, there's opportunity. So that's where I want to turn this presentation from talking about the water quality and kind of what the current status is from the San Juan Chama watersheds, and talk about kind of what the opportunities are further for restoration and the future. So, so the project, so here in the Chama watershed, we'll zoom into the kind of 2 projects that exist. So the Rio Nutrias specifically, this is a picture of kind of before the project was occurring. They developed a watershed-based plan. So you can kind of see that some of those sub-watersheds are highlighted in blue in the area around where the arrow is pointing. That area has a watershed-based plan, meaning that they have that approved by the EPA, and they've opened up that window of funding for Clean Water Act Section 319 projects. So they are working on implementation phase 2 work to install river crossings where they previously did not exist or were dramatically undersized, causing erosion and deposition issues and further contributing to the water quality impairments existing on the Rio Nutrias. So NMED awarded $219,000 in Clean Water Act Section 319 funds to Aguas Norteñas for the Rio Nutrias implementation work. So that project is, I believe, active and ongoing. So the next project is on Canjilon Creek. This one is very new. So the NMED actually awarded New Mexico State University Water Resources WRRI just over $2.4 million in River Stewardship Program funds to implement projects in 3 different locations in New Mexico. So this is the first kind of project of its kind, where we have multiple locations across the state and all sandwiched into one project, essentially. So their project is, they have one location on Canjilon Creek to do improve water quality and watershed conditions, and then they also have a project in Estaca, New Mexico, just outside of Espanola, and another project as all part of the same project, but project location and on near Placitas Arroyo, outside of Hatch, New Mexico. So the Canjilon Creek specific project goals are to improve water quality and river habitat to support cutthroat trout habitat in that area. So that's kind of what will be happening, I guess. So success stories to come, hopefully soon. So I wanted to just transition and talk real quick and finish up with the River Stewardship Program RFP. So we just issued the River Stewardship Program request for proposals. Basically, projects are awarded through this process and include their start to finish multiple year grants that include planning, permitting, design, construction, and monitoring. Projects occur in and around surface areas of the state, surface waters, of the state, including rivers, streams, wetlands, playa lakes, floodplains, riparian areas. So projects are collaborative in nature. We don't usually have just one cooperator doing a project. This includes multiple agencies. Permitting is required. So you have to have all of these people on board to basically complete these things. Stakeholders, local interest, land managers, landowners. So this includes an all-inclusive tribes, pueblos, state, local governments, nonprofits, and businesses. The funding, it's a state-funded program. So the big thing here is no match is required. This funding there's approximately $4.5 million available today. Depending on what the New Mexico legislature appropriates during the 2024 session, the program could see growth in funding potentially, and we would have approximately $9.5 million to award for projects under this current RFP that's open for on-the-ground projects. So the funding term, projects should be complete by approximately June 30th of 2027, which seems like it's a long time, but this all goes very quick when you run into permitting struggles. So so the RFP was released October 27th. Proposals are going to be due back January 4th to 2024. So it's open a little bit more than 60 days this year. It's a competitive process that complies with state procurement rules and evaluation criteria, ensure that projects are technically sound, community-based, and stakeholder-driven, and projects are start to finish. So a couple of FAQs, what is the minimum and maximum project amount that the River Stewardship Program will fund? There's no min or max, so that's a nice feature. I will say the average project has been about $500,000. What kind of projects will be funded? It's projects that improve surface water quality or river habitat within a waterway or a surface water or its associated riparian area or floodplain through on-the-ground activities. So if the end product of the project is a plan, it's really not eligible. It has to be it's an all-inclusive, meant to be on the ground to improve water quality. Are projects on government or private lands eligible? And the answer is yes to both. So projects on private lands must pass anti-donation clause review and have a private landowner agreement with the Environment Department to proceed. And then what costs are eligible for funding? So again, these are all inclusive, and the website's tagged on the bottom for more information, but planning, engineering design, permitting, construction, implementation, monitoring, supplies to specifically for the project in hourly wages and equipment rentals are all included. So to kind of follow this for the Surface Water Quality Bureau, you can follow us on our mailing list. You can sign up on our website. Again, here, I think the slides will be available also after this presentation or for the conference. And I will just end there with contact information. And stand for questions. Thanks. Yeah.
So, super impressive presentation.
Thanks.
Do you coordinate with the state engineer and Interstate Stream Commission on your process?
So the question, I'll just repeat it. Do I coordinate with the Office of the State Engineer and Interstate Stream Commission on the process? So currently, not explicitly, but it depends on, I guess, the project, or kind of if we have questions like, hey, does this impact you, but for any reason, or should we have a concern about this? We would reach out and figure out what that would look like. We've also had, interested parties with projects, and they're like, hey, what about work on this acequia or this ditch, and I always refer them to the water master in whatever district they're looking at and saying, hey, by the way, the state engineer's office is in your area. You might want to talk to them and make sure that this is something that they're interested in, or at least on board with, and involved with for that process. Yeah.
Quick question. I am
There we go. Okay.
a very happy recipient of one of your grants in the Canjilon area, the Water Institute. Thank you very much. And you, I'm sure, recall that particular project makes a very strident point about riparian health being very much reliant upon upper watershed conditions. And I noticed in this particular slideshow, it seems to suggest that projects can only be like the actual physical implementation in the riparian area, or are you also going to be looking at projects that improve riparian areas but are a little bit further upstream?
So traditionally, the program has always looked at improvement of riparian areas and surface water qualities, and that's always been the focus. And especially with the amount of funding we've had, the program over time has grown significantly, especially in the last 2 years. So I think thinking about what that looks like upstream, like my background certainly is also like watershed improvement. So you can't really treat the main problem necessarily just from the river. There's a whole watershed perspective that you have to include, and that includes a lot of forestry efforts. So this program specifically isn't really targeting the forestry pieces that sometimes need to occur, but we do consider and think about contributions of the watershed into what's solving the water quality problem for the river stewardship program as part of the holistic application and improvement of ground surface water quality. So thinking about from that standpoint, like for example, input of ephemeral stream systems that are kind of upland in the watershed and have a major sediment contribution to a stream just below that has, lo and behold, a impairment for sediment and siltation or turbidity. So, yeah, thanks.
Are there any additional questions?
Cool.
If not, thank you so much,
Thank
Kate.
you.
To introduce our next speaker will be Robert Saby, research scientist at the Water Resources Research Institute.
All right, thanks, Mark. Our next speaker is Shelley Lemon from the New Mexico Environment Department. Shelley has worked for the Surface Water Quality Bureau of the New Mexico Environment Department for over 19 years. As a bureau chief, Shelley currently manages and oversees 3 technical teams that fulfill the state's responsibilities under both Federal Clean Water Act and State Water Quality Act, such as developing and revising water quality standards, collecting and assessing water quality data, and protecting and restoring wetlands. Let's give a warm welcome to Shelley.
All right. Let's see. Hello, everyone. As was just introduced, my name is Shelley Lemon, and I am the Bureau Chief of the Surface Water Quality Bureau for the New Mexico Environment Department. I'm going to provide an overview today of recent changes to the definition of waters of the United States, impacts that we will see in New Mexico, and NMED's development of a state surface water quality permitting program. Let me see if I can figure this out. All right, cool. So this is my outline for today's talk. Essentially, I'm going to start with existing surface water quality protections, and then I will go into the Supreme Court's recent decision on the Sackett versus EPA case, and following up with a state permitting program survey that the Surface Water Quality Bureau sent out this summer, and then provide an overview of our state permitting program development to date. So, surface water quality protections do exist under both the Federal Clean Water Act and the New Mexico Water Quality Act. The Clean Water Act, which was enacted in 1972, made it illegal to discharge pollutants into navigable waters, or waters of the United States, without a permit. In addition, the New Mexico Water Quality Act has authorized the state to require permits for the discharge of pollutants to waters. Although currently the state only has a permitting program for groundwater discharges, it does not have a state permitting program for discharges to surface waters. So 47 out of 50 states in the United States have a national pollutant discharge elimination system program authorization from EPA. That can be summarized as, I'm going to say that as NPDES, so I don't have to say that long name. New Hampshire, New Mexico, and Massachusetts are the 3 states that do not have authorization for that federal permit program. Incidentally, only 3 states have assumed administration of the Clean Water Act Section 404 dredge or fill permitting program, and those states are Michigan, New Jersey, and Florida. In New Mexico, the Clean Water Act Section 402 NPDES permit program is administered by the EPA, and the Clean Water Act Section 404 dredge or fill permit program is administered by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. NMED does issue Clean Water Act Section 401 water quality certification of both NIPDs and 404 permits. And the purpose of those certifications is to reasonably ensure that the permitted activities will be conducted in a manner that will comply with our state water quality standards, including our anti-degradation policy and the statewide water quality management plan. So the scope of federal jurisdiction under the Clean Water Act is limited to what's known as waters of the U.S. However, no clarification of that phrase was provided in the enacting language of the Clean Water Act, and it was left to EPA and the Army Corps of Engineers to figure it out. One, to develop guidance, and two, to develop regulations that defined waters of the U.S. and the scope of federal jurisdiction under the Clean Water Act. So EPA and the Corps promulgated regulations in the 1980s, but the definition of waters of the U.S. has swung the pendulum 3 times since 2015, depending on each administration's interpretations. In 2015, Obama's Clean Water Rule emphasized the significant nexus test for federal jurisdiction, and it increased Clean Water Act jurisdiction over waters and wetlands in the U.S. In 2020, the Trump's Navigable Waters Protection Rule established or emphasized the relatively permanent test for federal jurisdiction, and basically removed Clean Water Act protections from many waters and wetlands in our nation. And then in 2021, Biden's WOTUS rule, Waters of the U.S. rule, codified the pre-2015, what we had been doing since the 80s, with some clarifications on Supreme Court decisions. And then in 2022, the Supreme Court heard the Sackett case. Michael and Chantel Sackett had been in a legal battle with EPA for over 15 years, and the dispute began in 2007 when the couple began to prepare a lot that they owned near Priest Lake in Idaho. And the EPA issued a stop work order on that project, telling them that the land contained wetlands that were protected under the Clean Water Act. The Sackett's latest appeal was to have the Supreme Court consider one issue, the definition of waters of the U.S., and whether the significant nexus test was the proper standard to determine federal jurisdiction under the Clean Water Act. So on May 25th of 2023, the Supreme Court issued their long-awaited opinion in Sackett v. EPA, and they held that the relatively permanent test is the test that should be used to determine Clean Water Act jurisdiction, which means that it applies to relatively permanent bodies of water that have continuous surface connections with navigable waters. On August 28th, 2023, EPA and the Corps issued a new definition of waters of the U.S. that was consistent with the Sackett decision and emphasized the relatively permanent test as the test that was to be used for Clean Water Act jurisdictional determinations. And the new rule was published in the Federal Register on September 8th. It became effective that same day. NMED's current understanding is that any existing federal permit under the NIPDs program or the 404 dredge or fill program is in effect unless the permit is terminated or it's not renewed. So we're still working through this process. So, although we don't know all of the ramifications of the Sackett decision yet, we do know that using only the relatively permanent test to establish federal jurisdiction in a semi-arid state like New Mexico is going to result in significantly less waters being protected under the Clean Water Act in our state. And New Mexico's definition of surface waters of the state is more inclusive than the definition of waters of the U.S. The current definition of surface waters of the state includes lakes, rivers, streams, including intermittent and ephemeral streams, wetlands, playa lakes, reservoirs, and natural ponds, and all tributaries to these waters, including adjacent wetlands. Approximately 4% of New Mexico's surface waters are perennial or relatively permanent, so this decision has a major impact on our state, whereas non-perennial waters make up 96% of New Mexico's surface waters. And under the Reagan era, pre-2015 waters of the US definition, permits were issued for discharges to ephemeral arroyos and other non-perennial waters. However, a narrower definition of waters of the US from the Sackett decision will result in all ephemerals and a good number of intermittent waters being excluded from federal Clean Water Act protections. In addition, many perennial streams in our state are interrupted and don't have continuous surface connections and therefore may not be subject to Clean Water Act protections under this new ruling. So without a surface water quality permitting program, it's going to be very difficult for New Mexico to protect surface waters of the state from contamination and degradation. All right, so I'm gonna switch gears now. That was kind of the preamble of why we're moving towards a surface water quality permitting program. And this summer, the Surface Water Quality Bureau sent a brief survey out to our listserv, as well as the Groundwater Quality Bureau's listserv, NIPD's individual permit holders, and key stakeholders that we identified. It was not a scientific survey and does not quantify stakeholder opinion, but it does give insight into the range of stakeholder concerns, which was the purpose of this. The intent of the survey was to gather thoughts about a state permitting program to help NMED understand concerns, perspectives, and questions. And we received 424 responses, 14 of which were repeat responses, and mainly the responses identified as interested state residents. But we received a range of different responses, including from environmental organizations and outdoor recreation. We received responses from federal, state, tribal, and local governments, acequias, irrigation districts, agriculture, and soil and water conservation districts. And we also received responses from different sectors of industry. And then we had another category for people who did not identify as any of those other categories. So survey respondents rated their support for developing a state-led water quality permit program for surface waters in New Mexico, and using a scale of very supportive, which is to the left of this slide, to very unsupportive on the right. Most respondents were very supportive at 81%, or somewhat supportive at 8%, and only 3% reported lacking the information to form an opinion on the topic. The second question of the survey asked respondents to state why they chose their specific level of support, and of those respondents who indicated support, they most often cited water quantity and water quality issues, local knowledge and control, and recent changes related to the definition of waters of the United States as part of their rationale for why they supported a state-led water quality permit program. Most of the concerns identified related to a state permitting program included program implementation issues, such as the scope of the program and NMED's staffing level and expertise, as well as concerns about additional regulations or requirements and fees or adequate funding to support a state permit program. Right. So the survey results will help guide the further development of the NMED state permit program outreach strategy, and it's also going to help NMED shape options for the program and answer questions related to program development and implementation. And there will be additional opportunities to share thoughts, concerns, and questions about a state-led surface water quality permitting program. We're really in the initial stages of this. If you'd like to stay informed about the process, or if you have questions, you can email us at swq.pp@env.nm.gov. And we also have a website that will be updated periodically as we get new information, and the website is listed on this slide. And as Kate mentioned, we also have a listserv on the Bureau's main webpage that you can sign up to join. All right, so as we all know, rivers, streams, lakes, wetlands, and other surface waters sustain the state's culture, economy, and natural ecosystems. And the state legislature has directed the NMED to create a state-led permit program. Currently, as I mentioned before, EPA staff in Dallas, Texas, develop and enforce permits to protect New Mexico's surface water quality. And New Mexico is only one of 3 states that does not develop and issue its own permits under the federal NPDES program, and the only state in the western United States to not have primacy over the program. A water quality permit program for surface waters led by New Mexico would have many benefits, including New Mexicans can create and implement a program to protect our surface waters in the way that's best for New Mexico. Permit writers who know the surface waters here would be drafting the permits and engaging with stakeholders directly. And a state-led permit program for surface water would help streamline permitting in New Mexico, including water quality permitting both for surface water and groundwater. But NMED has a lot of work to do before it completes a program submission for the federal NPDES program. So what does a state-led water quality permitting program look like in New Mexico? Currently, New Mexico's federal NPDES permitting universe consists of approximately 4,641 permittees. That includes individual municipal and industrial dischargers, concentrated animal feeding operations, stormwater dischargers covered by general permits, and additional facilities covered by non-stormwater general permits. A state permitting program to protect waters of the state beyond waters of the United States, including wetland protections, may result in additional permittees. An NMED will be required to build capacity in several different program areas, including permit writing, pre-treatment, biosolids, compliance and enforcement, also data management and handling, just to name a few of the program areas. So NMED is considering the major steps towards developing a state discharge permit program and acquiring the federal NPDES program authorization from EPA, which includes the 4 phases that are outlined on this slide. There's a significant level of effort necessary to develop and implement a state surface water discharge program with a phased implementation over time, which is outlined in phase 4, that we would be incorporating municipal permits one year, then industrial permits the next year, then stormwater permits the following year. So it would be a phased implementation of different types of permits over approximately a 5-year time frame. When we look at a state permitting program from initial development to full implementation, we estimate approximately 7 to 10 years for NMED to obtain full NPDES implementation. That includes EPA authorization and approval. For a surface waters of the state or non-Clean Water Act, non-federal, non-waters of the US program, we're estimating a shorter timeline, probably in the 4 to 6 year timeline for regulation development, legislation, process development like guidance and procedures, database development, because we currently do not have a permitting database, capacity building and training, and finally implementation where we would write those first permits. Currently, NMED is in phase 1 of permit program development, year 1 of phase 1. It's a 24-month timeline for phase 1. And we're engaging stakeholders and hoping to gain support and identify issues early in the process. We're reviewing existing statutes and regulations and will develop necessary regulatory and statutory changes based on the results of that analysis. We're developing a program outline for all major program components. And as we move forward with developing a permitting program, we will be working with stakeholders to evaluate the scope and application of a state discharge permit program. A state NIPD's permitting program cannot be less stringent than the federal program under the Clean Water Act. And program development will evaluate how a state discharge permitting program would be implemented and applied to surface waters of the state, including wetland protections. Projected resources needed at full NIPD's and SWATs, which stands for Surface Waters of the State, includes approximately 40 to 50 full-time employees, which right now our point source regulation section, we have 7 people, and we have 3 people who are working on the state permitting program development. So a total of 10 right now. This includes technical staff, including permit writers, pre-treatment coordinators, compliance assistants, and enforcement. We would need a database manager and data stewards to manage the data that we're receiving from the permittees. And we'd also need administrative, IT, HR, and financial staff support, as well as dedicated lawyers to help implement the program. That totals approximately $6 to $9 million annually for full implementation. And that would depend on the level of implementation and also the scope of the program that we eventually implement. Currently, NMED has received 2 special appropriations from the FY22 and the FY23 legislative sessions, and we're planning to request additional funding for program development in the FY24 session. With this funding, like I said, we've hired 3 staff to start developing the state discharge permitting program. We've hired 2 lawyers to help with the project. One is internal, who currently works in NMED's Office of General Counsel, and the other one is a contract lawyer. We're also working with a contractor to assist NMED with outreach and planning and developing a public outreach and involvement plan to build support and identify preferences or concerns. And we will be developing draft regulations and statute probably in the next calendar year in anticipation for the FY25 legislative session. And we have initiated database development to meet both surface water and groundwater discharge e-permitting and e-reporting needs. So that is an exciting development because that is in process. And we're anticipating a database being stood up in 1 to 2 years. So as we move through this process, there's a whole bunch of questions that we need to consider and answer. This is just a sampling. What do we do about groundwater, or how do we integrate groundwater into this program? Will NMED, OCD, or EPA implement the NIPD's program for oil and gas operations? What is the funding or fee structure going to look like? What is the scope of a state permitting program for discharges to surface waters of the state that are not waters of the U.S.? How will ephemeral waters or indirect discharges be addressed by a state-only permit program? Will a state-only program be more stringent than EPA's program? Where or how does environmental justice factor in a state-only permitting program? And then I'm imagining a whole multitude of other questions that will come up as we go through this process and engage stakeholders in the public. So with that, I will leave you with some contact information. For me, Crystal Weatherly is the Assistant General Counsel who's working on this project. So if you have legal questions, you can contact her. And then our Water Protection Division Director, John Roderick, who is my boss. So with that, I'll open it up for any questions that you may have. I'll take off my glasses.
So there's quite a few communities that rely on ephemeral water sources for their primary source of water, especially tribal communities. Is there anything that NMED is doing in the interim of this 4 to 6 year period to ensure clean water for communities that otherwise can't guarantee it?
That is a great question. We are looking into different authorities that we have. We are limited. We can't issue permits yet, but we are pretty creative. If there is something that happens that is reactive, we can definitely, react and enforce on an illicit discharge or something that is discharged to a river or stream that shouldn't be there. We're also working with our Groundwater Quality Bureau to try to incorporate surface water protections into groundwater discharge permits where we can. Again, that's a limited scope. We are thinking of, right now it's really more of a reactive phase than a proactive phase, but when the permit program gets implemented, then it would be more proactive than reactive. So we don't have a great solution right now for those types of concerns, but in our water quality, or our water protection division, we work with groundwater, surface water, and drinking water programs are all in the same division, and we work really closely together to try to protect water quality across all three of those different resources.
Thank you.
Hello, Shelly. Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm Ronwei from New Mexico State University. I'm not working in the policy aspects, and very not familiar about the permitting and then permitting writing and those kind of tasks. So please don't. My specific question is about how the permitting program will respond to the newly published standards from EPA. For example, I have specifically interested in the PFAS, and we know EPA is giving PFAS in the drinking water standards. They have drafted their preliminary regulations. So if they are going to publish related regulations in the surface water, how the permitting programs going to in response to the newly published standards, and how will that newly published standards affect those permits have already been given to the end users? Thank you.
Great. So there's a couple of things to tease apart there. We currently, in our 401 certifications, which we have authority right now to do for the Clean Water Act permits, we have been implementing PFAS requirements into those permits. With the PFAS standards that you're talking about for drinking water and potentially for surface water, we would evaluate that and see if we want to adopt those standards or similar standards into our water quality standards. That would be a rulemaking process. Once they're adopted into our water quality standards, then we could put actual numbers into permits. Right now, we're putting requirements on monitoring and reporting, and also if the reporting comes back and there are PFAS present, then having some requirement to figure out what the source of it is, where it is, mitigating those sources and doing some sort of best management practice to reduce the PFAS that's coming into that treatment process wherever it's coming in. So long story short, it would probably be a rulemaking if EPA issued guidance on PFAS standards, and we would look at adopting those into our state water quality standards.
Shelley, over here on the left. Oh,
Sorry, just a question about the implementation of the permitting program, because you've lined out lots of different phases, and also, there are a lot of resources putting together to to make that happen. You also made a mention of other states and kind of New Mexico being slightly different. So I'm wondering if in all this process, if there is any other experience from other states that might help to sort of lay some of that groundwork because it's such an intensive change that you're going through.
Yes, and we are communicating with other states. The most recent states to have gone through NIPD's program authorization are Idaho and Alaska. We've been communicating with them to talk about lessons learned or, things that might help implement a program for New Mexico. It's hard because, especially for the NIPD's program, states have been doing this since the late 70s, early 80s, so it's been a long time. New Mexico is very late to the game, but we are communicating with other states. In fact, the database that I was talking about is a permitting database from another state that we're incorporating and adapting to New Mexico's needs. So we're not trying to rebuild the wheel or create a new wheel. We're using what seems to work in other states and adapting it to what we need here in New Mexico.
Shelley?
Hi.
On the survey that you did related to changing the permit steps, how many of those respondents were current permit holders? Do you know?
Do we know? Off the top of my head, oh God, less than 10%.
So follow-up question, do you have any plans to reissue the survey specifically to your permit holders just to get their feedback on what the change might mean to them?
We're not going to reissue the survey because we're moving forward with the program. We will engage permittees as stakeholders. We plan to develop an advisory committee for the program when we get to the stage where we actually have things for an advisory committee to consider and talk through and talk about. So permittees are definitely stakeholders, and we will be engaging them as we work through this process.
Your talk just illustrates how vulnerable New Mexico is to the whims, and a year from now we may even be in worse shape. And we do not, a person who's been here 60 years and watching the wind, this is a real sea change. This change in at a Supreme Court level and various levels, and so. Good luck to you guys.
We'll need it. Thank you.
We have one more question.
Has your office assessed the impact of septic systems on the water system?
Not specifically. We do have a liquid waste program in NM that looks at septic waste and permit septic systems. We do projects to specific areas, but not on a statewide assessment of how they impact surface waters. But when we have impairments and we think that some of the problem is septic systems, that's where the Clean Water Act Section 319 funding that Kate Lacey talked about comes into play to help mitigate those septic systems. So it's not a complete statewide assessment, but we do it where there are impairments, and depending on the the planning documents that we use for the watershed and water quality improvement.
One last question.
Okay.
Thank you very much. As a follow-up to the question on your front left, were the questionnaires sent to every permit holder existing right now? And if not, why not?
Individual permit holders, yes. The general permit holders, like for construction general permit, we don't have Because EPA administers the program, we don't have a complete list at any given time. It's hard to get, but we did send to all of the individual permit holders.
Okay, well, that's visionary. Thanks so much, Shelley. I just wanted to give a thank you to our staff from the Water Resources Research Institute. Did a great job in front of the group, like Mark Shelley, who really put all this together. And if you look in the back there, we have our staff lined up. We have Sabrina, Mary Beth, Carson, Jeanette, Kayla, Carolina, Mark again. So thank you very much. We will now have a break and reconvene at 3:45.
Thanks, Mark. Boy, I couldn't be more excited than to have the opportunity to introduce Stacy Timmons. What a ball of fire. Stacy is an associate director of the hydrogeology programs at the State Geologic Survey, the New Mexico Bureau of Geology and Mineral Resources in Socorro. Building from the aquifer mapping and monitoring program in 2019, Stacy launched the implementation of the Water Data Initiative and the Water Leaders Education Program in 2022. Please welcome Stacy Timmons.
Okay. Thank you, John. It's funny to be introduced as a ball of fire when I'm going to be talking to you about water. So, well, this is a different clicker. You guys, this is weird. So I am an associate director for hydrogeology at the New Mexico Bureau of Geology, which means I get to do all the fun around water from the State Geologic Survey. We're also at the New Mexico Tech University campus, and within the realm of hydrogeology programs is the aquifer mapping and monitoring efforts that's been going on for several years, the Water Data Initiative, which is what I'm going to talk about today, and then the Water Leaders Water Education Program that we're launching starting this year as well. So this slide is stating the obvious to most of you, which is that here we are living in the 21st century where all of us walk around, pretty much all of us, with a computer in our pockets or on our person somewhere. And we use it to access all different types of data to answer everyday normal questions. Many things that we do on a day-to-day basis run on very accessible machine-readable data. One of the things that our family likes to do driving through the city is try to find the cheapest gas, and that is quick and easy to do with one of these little tools in our hands. Try to answer the question of, where does my water come from where I live? Is it city supply? Is it the river? Is it a well? Those sorts of questions are not readily answerable from our devices right now. Additional questions like, I'm going to take my dog to the river in this location. Is it safe for my dog to swim in the river? Is it safe for my kids to play in the river? Those sorts of questions are also hard to answer with the tools and the data available that we have right now. So a lot of us work in water and spend a lot of time collecting the data, building reports, putting together maps and tools to help answer some of these questions that many of us have. And we spend a tremendous amount of time compiling data. Some of the work that we do at the Bureau of Geology around aquifer mapping requires synthesis of data from water, from oil and gas, from NMEDs, drinking water wells, and we spend sometimes months compiling data so that we can build three-dimensional pictures of aquifers. Work done in the state agencies like the Interstate Stream Commission and OSC, as well as NMED, also have to collect this kind of water data to synthesize for reports. And in most cases, I'd say we're not lacking in the data itself. A few cases we are. But most of the time, it's integration of that data so that we don't have to spend months collecting and compiling and cleaning and organizing the data to answer our fairly straightforward questions. So in 2019, about 4 years ago, New Mexico passed legislation that says that we will do better with our water data. It's said to be a collaborative effort working with regional and national efforts and with the state to improve how we manage our data, how we share our data out, both internal to our agencies and out of our agencies, and then how that data is integrated together with other similar data features. The Bureau of Geology, the State Geologic Survey where I'm at, is named as the convening agency of this effort, which means we just get to organize people and try to get everybody going in the same direction. We're working with the Office of the State Engineer, the Interstate Stream Commission, the Environment Department, and Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources. So all of these agencies are named specifically in this legislation. The kind of work that we're asked to do, and this is language taken straight out of the legislation and the now statute, says that we'll identify key water data, information, and tools needed to support water management and planning. We're going to identify data standards for data collection, identify or develop integrated, sorry, my children are texting me about things, develop integrated water data and information platforms, and then work on identifying some of those available data and the other unavailable data and work to improve some of that. So the Water Data Act then goes on to list a whole long list of water data that are water features that have data about them that we should be working on. Everything from stream flow to municipal and industrial water uses to water diversions, water quality. There's even fish and aquatic and riparian systems data that are included in that. And you'll notice of those 5 agencies that I named, none of them have fish, aquatic, and riparian systems data. So it's just an interesting tidbit that we're required to collect and work with, but nobody on our list has to participate is collecting that data. There's actually been a tremendous amount of progress on the Water Data Act over the last 4 years. A lot of it kind of in the background underneath the hood of data tools and kind of platforms that have been put together or tested. But to begin with, we established some governance around this effort, different working groups, and have now agency points of contacts at each of those 5 agencies named. The different working groups include a directing agencies team. We've met just recently with a number of folks in the directing agencies, those 5 agencies, really working to kind of clarify what some of the challenges are in the agencies to make water data more available and set some goals with how we're going to improve on that. There's an executive steering committee, so that's like the agency leaders so that they know from staff that certain priorities that need to be heard up at the upper levels of the agency. There's a data users working group and a technical working group. The technical working group meets pretty much monthly and works on data standards and evaluating different data sharing options. So we have built and continue to maintain a pretty extensive data catalog that helps make at least an initial pass at finding data more simple. And I'll talk more about that here shortly, but the websites, my presentation has a whole bunch of URLs in it. I'm happy to share the presentation to you later, or you can start looking at that when you have time. We are required in the statute to put together an annual report each year that is due on September 1st to various legislative committees as well as the governor's office. So we put together the 2023 plan, and that is available now on our website under the resources tab. We've also been working really hard to increase funding to the agencies and to others who are impacted by this effort and legislation. So the graph that you can see here is since 2019, the funding that has been available. This is recurring annual funding and non-recurring funding. And so you can see a steady increase, and the different colors on the bars represent the different agencies who are receiving that funding. You notice in 2023 a substantial increase at the Office of the State Engineer and Interstate Stream Commission. That was when they received $410,000 in recurring funding for 3 FTEs to work specifically on water data. And then in 2024, this fiscal year, another substantial increase. That's where they're working on it's called a C2 funding project to improve a database that they have in-house. So, and then just here in this 2024 year, MNRD was able to get funding for one position. So they're starting to work on hiring right now for an IT position to help modernize some of their data structures in that agency. So in our 2023 water data plan, we put together each year a kind of a synthesis of each agency's main goals of funding and what kind of things they need to spend that funding on. So positions, FTEs at the agencies in different sections of the agencies, as well as certain non-recurring funding needs like to buy a new database platform or to improve some sort of hardware or software feature. So this is compiled, so it's a goal, not a budget request per se, of $2.875 million for all of the 5 agencies that is needed. And you can see the breakdown in this table with NMED at the upper end and I think MNRD at the lower end in the range of recurring funding needs. This graph shows the same data that I had previously, but now just with the recurring funding. So every agency has some, to keep staff there, you have to have a recurring budget. And so this is showing just that the agencies that presently have Water Data Act funding in them. And so you can see the blue bar is the New Mexico Bureau of Geology, our agency. So we started with $100,000 to get this effort going. And that lasted through the first 3 years. And then in 2023 fiscal year, that's when you can see that Office of State Engineer got that increase, and then in 2024, that MNRD additional funding. So NMED has yet to receive any funding specifically for water data work. And you can see that bar at the top, the line, the red line, that's basically that target. So there's still a long ways to go to kind of fill in all of the funding needs at the agencies to really address the water data challenges that they have. Kind of relating back to that technical working group, we have really worked to develop a federated data infrastructure. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what that means and data standards to help make data more interoperable and integrated. And so the technical working group has a wiki page basically that describes data standards in a variety of different categories. And we've been working to refine and implement those with the different agencies as well as other data providers. Right now, we have kind of 2 different lanes of how we're sharing our water data. One is that data catalog that I've mentioned. This is really a great landing platform. It's built in an open source space. It's called CCAN, which I'll talk briefly about here in a minute. And this is really just like a point of engagement for us to start like shining the light on what are the different data features, who has what, do we have it all? Are we missing certain data features? The kind of end goal for us is working towards this federated data model. And with that, what that means is that this isn't Stacy building a database and everybody hands me some data, here's a spreadsheet, here's what I want you to take care of. Rather, what this is the agencies build with their own data system internally. They build an API, an application programming interface with a specific data standard so that that data is basically turned out publicly when it's ready, and then that can be integrated and woven together with other similar data sets. So that's really our big goal, is to work toward this federated data model, which I'll also jump into in a minute. So if you go to the catalog.newmexicowaterdata.org, this is kind of the landing page right now. There's been a few improvements since I made this slide. So this is a place where numerous agencies, including federal agencies and local data providers, have provided a link to their data or perhaps a specific data set so that it can be shared and made more available. If you are a data collector or a data provider and you go to this catalog and find that your organization is not up to date, or you find that it's not there, or you find that our data features that are on here are not current, it's really easy to add you as an admin for your organization and have you update those data features. So if you go to the website, I can't point, can I? There's a little red circle around at the top right corner of the website. It says to create a login and registration. So You can, we can set up an account. We just have to click 2 buttons, and we'll make it so that you can update your own data that's listed in there. And it has tagging so that the data can be searched in a variety of different ways, can be grouped together by county, or it can be grouped together by the type of feature, like groundwater quality or something to that effect. It's kind of up to the data provider to help us with that or to do that for themselves. And there's a lot of different things that we can add to going forward now that we have this set up. So as we work towards this more federated data model, this is my attempt at building an analogy around water, which is a bunch of braided streams. I think, can you get the gist of what that cartoon is? There's a bunch of streams coming together, different data sources. So really what we're aiming for is that we have structured data that's linked with other related data. It's spatially indexed and organized by topics, so it's super findable. And basically, the outside user doesn't have to know who has that data. The average person doesn't have to know that the NMED, Groundwater Quality Bureau, has a whole bunch of water quality data from monitoring wells. They just go and find the water quality data at the endpoint. So no knowledge is needed, so that basic Google question can be asked without having to know who to go to and what to ask for. So that's kind of the end goal, and making integration happen is going to be reliant on these application programming interfaces. An API is basically computer language, computer to computer talk. So in the interest of, I think, weaving all of these different data sources together, this graphic is trying to show how there is data in the research realm, in the academic realm, data in the state agencies, data in federal agencies, and then other local data providers. Each of them have different features, different data to show, and they have different ways of storing that data internally and making it available. So what's happening in each of these data streams on our little cartoon here is that they have some format of a database or an Excel spreadsheet. Then they can share that Excel spreadsheet using our data catalog, and that generates an API. From that API, it comes together at what I'm calling the confluence. And I love that there's a poster in the back corner about beavers, because I think beavers are going to save the day. This is our beaver dam. We're calling the confluence. At the juncture of all of these data streams, there's a place, an API management platform, basically, that can help us weave together all of these different sources. So you have an Esri web portal that has data available. That has an API and a REST service that can be made available and pushed through this confluence and then put together with other similar data. And the outside user is able to not have to go digging. They can just come to this portal and grab that data. Dashboards and tools can be built from that much more easily than what our current situation is. So we're hiring a couple of beavers, and we're building a beaver dam for our water data, and it's all coming together, slowly but surely. So all of that said, there are some challenges, and I like to envision this as another analogy, a three-headed dog from the Harry Potter movie. So imagine you're Ron, Harry, and Hermione, and you are facing some really terrible things around water data. One of our biggest challenges is willpower. So there are a lot of people working in these agencies doing great work and doing it the way that they've always done it. It's hard to start changing the process and the workflow. So there's culture around our data and how we've been using it that has to start shifting. And so we're really trying to push a paradigm shift in how we manage our data and how we share our data out externally. There's a technical challenge, a second problem, which is that many of our staff, there are many empty seats in our state agencies. There are vacancies. There are positions that really are needed to help kind of address this data challenge. So filling capacity needs at the agencies and a skill set that is required to help build some of these more modern tools. And there are people in these agencies that know how to do this. They just maybe have 5,000 other things on their plate. There's also an issue with metadata and communication. So being able to clearly communicate up and down your chain about what some of the challenges are with your water data and how you can solve that is a really big technical issue. And then I think the third one on here is pretty obvious to many of us. But there is a really big financial challenge, as I listed in that graphic. So there are some infrastructure needs for water data that need to be improved, and kind of funding at some of our state and regional data providing agencies to make our data more shareable and findable. So with the kind of, now that we've built some of these APIs, we have built some tools that help us to visualize this. One of the funding things I didn't mention is that we've been able to get WaterSmart grants, leveraging some of our state funding with federal dollars on specific regional projects. And so we have a project, this one here on the screen right now is not a WaterSmart, the next one is, but this one is funded through some philanthropic organizations, primarily Thornburg Foundation. Our goal with this was to put together all the groundwater level data for New Mexico. And from this, you can click on a point. So the map that you see here is accessible from the waterdata.org, New Mexico Water Data Viz, DataViz is the page. And you can go to this map and you can see a quick snapshot of arrows going up, arrows going down, or bars that are horizontal. That represents basically a summary of what the groundwater level changes that we're seeing in places where there's regular monitoring happening at least once a year. So you can see the coverage of where we have groundwater level monitoring in the state. And then when you click on a point, you can see a graph like the one displayed here where it gives you kind of a trend. I picked a happy one that looked like it had an upward trend for you. So that's one tool that we've built. Another one with the WaterSmart grant is shown here. We're working closely with the Pecos Valley Artesian Conservancy District and put together a bunch of different data sources for a dashboard tool. It highlights 10 wells that the PVACD has been monitoring for decades, back into the 50s. That data is fascinating to look at. And then along with that, we have data from a variety of other sources, including the Interstate Stream Commission's monitoring around the Seven Rivers well field, including the state engineer's office data that they go out and collect manually, and then some other USGS and data from our agency that's collected in the region. And again, when you click on it, you can see very long time series, you can download data, you can make graphs of different types. The graphs that I have shown here are a couple of those very long well records from the PVACD, and you can see the annual variations going up and down and up and down. Those 10 wells are now instrumented with real-time monitoring as well. So that region is preparing and getting ahead of some of these challenges that we've been hearing about all day around climate change. So a big thing that we're wondering is there's this idea that if you build these APIs and you build these dashboards, you build all the access to the data, will they come? If you build it, will they come? And I'm hoping this audience and your friends and colleagues that also work in water can help us to develop tools and explore these data. There are folks in the national sphere that are doing this right now. There's a couple of links on here that have actually leveraged work that we've done in New Mexico to show some of the value of having more open and accessible data. We've been working alongside of the Internet of Water, which is an organization that started from Duke University and now has broadened to include several organizations. They have basically, they've helped us jump into this realm of open water data, but they've also kind of helped us to learn from other states around us. So California has an open water data legislation that they did in 2016. And from what I hear from our Internet of Water colleagues, New Mexico is already way ahead of all of the other states doing anything with water data. So it's really nice to know that we're on the leading edge, but also a little scary that we're figuring this out and learning as we go as well. With the tools that are available here, there's one, GeoConnects, which is basically utilizes published API data. If you have any sort of data published and available from a variety of sources, you can go to this demo that is provided here, and it grabs anything that's published and online and available and gives you a little walkthrough for New Mexico specifically on how our data is integrated with other data sources. The River Runner feature is a really fun one to play with too, because you can drop a pin, drop of water on some river or any basin really, and it'll show you where that drop of water flows and where it eventually ends in the ocean. So fun little tool, but it also brings in data So the little image at the bottom here was a pin drop on the Rio Grande, and it shows the USGS gauge at one location along the way. And you can click on all the little USGS gauges along the way too. So it's a cool feature highlighting that once data are open and integrated, all of the different things that you can start to do with that. So I have no idea where I'm at on time. Good? Oh, I have lots of minutes. Okay. I was gonna go and like do some data demos, like click on some of these links, but I don't think I will. I'll just leave it open for questions at the end here. But my ask of you all here is to continue to engage around water data and play with things and try out some of the links on our webpage and tell me, this didn't answer my question, or this is interesting, I'd like to learn more about it. Be happy to add you to some data users working groups, and as we develop new tools, ask for feedback from you. But please check out the data catalog, and if you have an agency kind of database or something that we are not showing on there, definitely let us know. If you have an Excel spreadsheet, that is easy to upload there. So there are some really good data principles that we've been turning to kind of get ideas about how we should move forward on this. The Internet of Water website has a category for principles, and I highly encourage you to kind of build data literacy by learning through sites like this that help us kind of move toward this more modern data sharing practices. We do have a mailing list at the very bottom of our website, which is newmexicowaterdata.org. There's a newsletter sign up. We send out once a month or every 2 months, variety of things like job opportunities around water data, new tools that have been developed, grant opportunities. If you have information you'd like to get out to the world, feel free to email me as well, and we can put that into our newsletter. And then looking ahead to next year, we will be having a water data workshop somewhere here in Albuquerque, yet to be determined. It'll be on Thursday, May 2nd. And usually what we try to do with these workshops is have the state agencies, regional data providers, federal agencies, whoever is working on a water data issue or complexity, come and present and talk about how they've solved these problems or what challenges they're facing, and kind of build that dialogue for New Mexico about how we can access and learn from each other, how we can access our water data. So I think that's all I have for slides. I'm happy to take questions. Really appreciate your time and attention. Thank you. I can't see if there's questions. It's like staring into a train.
Hi, Stacy.
Hi.
Yeah, thank you so much for presenting such an interesting idea. I especially like the beaver dam one, like have all the data resources accumulated in a beaver dam. However, like my question is still about the beaver dam. Like when beaver building a dam, right, it doesn't care about the wood is rodent or like fresh or like oak wood or such other woods. I mean, but like when we doing a data, like a water data, like a database, like accumulating a lot of resources, how are we going to control the quality, the uncertainty from different resources? Yeah.
Yes, Runway, that's a really good question.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, the beaver dam is just trying to be creative with how we're building our API management tools. The data quality, our expectation and hope is that the people providing data will provide a quality assurance, and especially, state agencies, what they're sharing out should be their finest quality data, right? Other data sources, perhaps there's a citizen science group who has less QA/QC tools available. My vision at the end of this is that there is a way that we're, through this API management tool, we're able to see the collective data on a similar topic, and then as we plot or use some machine learning tools to kind of put together all of the data, we can see those flyers, see the points where they're way out of range of what's expected, and those would be then marked or flagged in some way. I think within the statute, there is no judgment on the data that we're supposed to provide, but I do think that there are opportunities to compare that data with other similar data and provide some sort of flagging when there are issues to help kind of caution the end user about data quality issues. Yeah, that's an important point that we've been trying to get to as well. Yep. Yes.
So thank you for that. I was going to ask a similar question, but I'll follow on with another question. I think it's at least important to list what you believe the error is, because as a researcher using that data, I need to report that in my reports. So it's very important to know at least what we have coming in. Garbage in, garbage out.
Right.
So it's important to know what that quality assurance is for that data, even if it's not the best. Sometimes that's okay, so long as we know where we're standing.
Right. And that, I think, some of that is also embedded in our data standards, so that when, I don't know, for our example, we're collecting a bunch of groundwater level measurements and the person in the field says, well, this is not a good measurement because the well was pumping, that is flagged in our data set. And so in our data standards, we say if there are data flags, that should also go through the API and become publicly available. So I think, yes, absolutely. If it's available, it should be listed. And I'll remind our technical working group that that is an important feature.
It's part of just being honest and open in science.
Absolutely. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation, and it's always a pleasure to hear you and hear where we're at with respect to the Water Data Act of 2019. My concerns as I look through some of the screens is the three different departments that you're working with and their inability to get current staff, their current funded rates, their transfers from salary and benefits at the end of the year, and the expectation that the Bureau has as the controlling agency over this, relying on those departments. What do you see as your way around that? And as we've talked in the past, the current stakeholder reports that came from the first report, I still have huge concerns over with respect to water being taken away as a commodity and to a common use and a common good policy with respect to that to people that have had land and water here for several hundred years. So I guess my primary question to you is, how do you plan on working with those three departments that aren't able to manage haven't been over the last several years, their funded agency rates and their transfers? Thank you.
Yes, this is a question that does keep me up at night. It has been increasingly apparent that it is hard to, so the agencies put in a budget request each year in the early summer, and it moves through a process in the state government to an end approval or not that ends at the legislative session and the governor's signature. So funding the agencies to do this work is critical so that they have positions and are able to hire and staff those positions. One thing that we're exploring, because it has been hard for agencies to make independent requests, water data is one of 18 different priorities at each agency, or more priorities. It's not always the top 3, so it doesn't always make it through in terms of a new budget request. So one thing we're exploring is a potential, perhaps seeking non-recurring funding for an extended period of time, maybe up to 5 years, through the Bureau of Geology. I don't know if this is actually going to fly, but then doing basically a 5-year or a multi-year grant program to the agencies with very specific data kind of expectations and goals, and we work with them to help them kind of temporarily staff up to work on these issues. It's kind of thinking outside the box at this point, but this has been a real challenge that I don't think any of us expected. Maybe you did, I don't know. Maybe several of us expected and how things operate in New Mexico, but I think it's I think there's opportunities to utilize non-recurring funding to build in at least a multi-year project that agencies can then implement. So that's my next idea on that. But it's a real problem, and I think it's important. So thanks for acknowledging that. Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you all.
It is my pleasure to welcome up to the stage John Teisling. John is an economist with more than 3 decades of professional experience. He provides applied economic analyses relating to natural resources development and planning, business transactions, energy systems performance, water resource management, regulatory and tax policy issues, renewable resource investment, public utility regulation and rates, and economic development impact assessments. John's expert opinions have been accepted in numerous state and federal courts, regulatory agencies, and in testimony before a variety of legislative bodies throughout the U.S. Thank you, John, and welcome to the stage.
So good afternoon. I guess I'm standing between you and the posters. I think maybe that's better than standing between you and the bar. But I want to share with you some thoughts that I have that after a day of intense data and analytical methodologies being presented, have possibly created a sense that this is in some ways overwhelming. In some ways, water management issues are terribly complex. But I want you to know first that my professional education is directly a product of the Water Resources Research Institute. When I was in graduate school, we had a series of projects that were basically water supply and demand analyses by basins. This really dovetails nicely with what Stacy just said. And I had to go do research at the state engineer's office. There were 2 gentlemen in the basement of the state engineer's office, Earl Sorensen and Brian Wilson, that tabulated by hand on accounting ledgers water use data. And that served as the foundation for these reports that we produced that married water use with economic information by basin, and was the best available resource at the time. This water data initiative that Stacy has got is light years beyond what we were doing at that time. The other thing that I want you to be aware of is that I have a fairly unique graduate education. I've somehow managed to convince the chairman of the Department of Economics and my faculty advisors that I should do a program that had 2 field focuses. One was applied natural resources economics. That's what I do. And the other was taking the series of courses at the law school related to natural resources, including the water law courses that were available at the time. An upshot of what turned into my dissertation was a project that was funded through WRRI, the National Science Foundation, that was a 3-year study of the economic impacts of alternative resolutions of Pueblo Indian water rights in the Upper Rio Grande. We're talking early 1980s. No, I'm not that old, but got to admit to it at times. And my co-investigators in this included Lee Brown from the Econ Department, Al Utton, and Chuck Dumars. So I now have to figure out how to use this little device. Forward. Tell me that's forward. That's nothing. That's nothing. That's nothing. Ah, here we go. I run out of buttons. So, Chuck Dumars taught me two primary principles of water resource and water law management. Beneficial use shall be the basis, the measure, and the limit of the right to use water in New Mexico. And, of course, prior appropriation and water right priorities best understood in the simple language of first in time, first in right. Well, as we proceeded through our work on the Pueblo Indian water rights analysis, I developed some complex input-output model of the Upper Rio Grande Basin and drew some assumptions, some conclusions, and came up with a solution that the most economically beneficial way to resolve the Pueblo Indian water rights issues in the Upper Rio Grande was to basically say, let's stop the fighting. Let's just give the tribes, the Pueblos, the water they're asking for, and allow them to lease that water to other users. That, if at some point in the future they had not used the full entitlement or leased it, that it would revert to the public. Of course, it's important to recognize that water resources, air resources, are public trust resources for management. Well, Chuck had given me these foundations, and I put together my dissertation, and it didn't go anywhere. It hardly was even reviewed because it was an outrageous idea in the early 80s to say, just let it go. Give up the fight and let the market help to resolve those issues. Well, I left the university, went to the state land office for about 7 years, and there are lots of other things happening. I'm not trying to impress you with what I've done. I'm trying to share a story of water management evolution. And so I get to the land office and am working away on a variety of things, including a lot of energy work, which has really kind of dominated my consulting practice over the years. And then I find out that Chuck Dumars is assisting the Pecos Valley water users in resolving the conflict there by saying, let's just buy water rights and retire them, and buy them by appropriating money from the legislature. Doesn't matter about this priority thing, junior, senior rights. We'll find people who are willing to sell their rights and buy our way out of this problem. I couldn't believe it. I honestly felt, oh my goodness, where is this going? And a little bit of a betrayal. But as I will explain in a few moments, maybe I shouldn't have been so judgmental about Professor Dumars or even my work. And so I went on and spent some years doing primarily, like I said, energy-related consulting. Turns out that for an economist, there is a lot more income and consulting opportunity related to energy resource issues than there is related to water issues. But water has always been my passion. And so, long story short, had a great success in a variety of national consulting, as the intro suggested. But the issue about how do we deal with water problems, how do we address the role in society that water plays and the communities that it impacts. So this diagram I lifted from Water Resources Research Institute report related to the 50-year water planning lead up to that. And this diagram, I'm not going to go through it in great detail, but what this depicts, these are comments from the community about how the various elements of public concerns about water should be integrated into the 50-year water plan. I think it's a pretty good diagram and expresses what we're beginning to see. It's no longer a black and white seniority-based system. It's a system that's taking a much more robust look at the other issues that need to be considered in water resource management. Again, water resources are a public trust management issue. And so I was encouraged to see this in that report. And then I went on to the next step in that report. And it talks about a dynamic statewide water budget model. And for those of you who work in water resources, this is a very familiar sort of diagram. It shows all of the places where there are an ability to measure the inputs into the system and where the system returns water after use. The notion here is that it's a complex model, obviously, but I also want you to understand that, what are there, 14 variables in this one slide, 14 different data points that need to be established to develop for one small point. It's usually a gauging station or some other point within a watershed. And to really do this water budget, you have to have many of these observations at different physical points, and you need to compile that data over many years. It becomes a huge data problem. That's not to say, and particularly after you just heard what Stacy is talking about, that's doable. Now, back when Earl Sorensen and Brian Wilson were hand tabulating water use data, this wasn't even conceivable. So we've made some real strides. We're integrating the community issues. We're watching more carefully how we quantify water and water use. And we're getting more sophisticated in this. So about a year and a half ago, I was contacted by this California water attorney, and he said, I'm working on this problem. And this problem that he was working on is that, and deep dive back into history, 150 years ago, on the island of Maui, there was a king, and there were sugar plantations and sugar plantation barrens. And 150 years ago, the sugar barons built an aqueduct system, and if you've been to Maui, maybe you recall this. Maui has some pretty high mountains, and the north side of the island is where most of that mountain runoff goes. There's more than 75 inches of annual precipitation at the top of the mountain, and they had to intercept it before it got to the ocean. It was their fresh water supply. And so they built this aqueduct system. They dug tunnels through solid rock. A lot of labor issues there that we probably don't want to talk about. And that system delivers water from the north side of Maui to the central plains, the agricultural area in central Maui. Also provides some water for domestic uses and so on and so forth. And it's been very successful for 150 years. Well, economics get in the way now and then. And in 2016, the owners of the remaining plantation that was there irrigated about 60,000 acres of sugarcane, determined it was economically infeasible to continue the development and use of that cropland for sugarcane. And so they stepped away, and the land didn't go entirely fallow, but a entity called Maipono stepped in, and with funding from Canadian Pension Fund, they have purchased the aqueduct and the agricultural properties and want to redevelop it as sustainable agriculture, sustainable in the sense that it provides food and employment for the residents of Maui, as opposed to, if you've been to Maui and eaten in a restaurant or gone to a grocery store, you know food is very expensive. And so the issue was that they needed to get a permit to use water. I said to this attorney, so tell me about the water rights. What's the law related to water rights in Hawaii? And he said, well, there aren't water rights in Hawaii. The only thing that they have to work with is something that has been in the Constitution and has been endorsed by the Hawaiian Supreme Court, that those water resources are to be managed as a public trust. And so how do you do that? I mean, you start from zero, basically. You know you've got some communities that are very much dependent upon this aqueduct system to deliver domestic water for some of the small communities. But something on the order of, let's just say round numbers, 60% of the fresh water supply of Maui comes from those aqueduct systems and are historically used for irrigated agriculture. Well, the public trust doctrine is not well defined, and there are a number of entities that want cultural resources. The slide before this one was really intended to suggest how we in New Mexico are planning for our water future. But in Maui, they don't really have much in the way of principles to do this. So the Department of Land and Natural Resources for the state of Hawaii, who has the authority to grant use permits, said, well, how are we going to value this use permit? And they said, well, I think we need a fair market value appraisal. The state will sell you or lease you the water at the full fair market value of that resource. Well, of course, that would mean that there would be almost no profit to be made from agriculture, and it would not reflect other issues that are related to the communities, the domestic water systems, what we would consider to be cultural resources in Hawaii. And so I was asked, how do you approach this question? A little bit of background in New Mexico water. And I said, well, an appraisal, appraiser works on market value assessments. And since there is no market, and since 60% of the fresh water available has no other use that is competitive with that large of an allocation, how are you going to get to an appraised value for the fair market value of water in Maui? Well, it is a very complex governmental resource management issue. In the United States, where we've had public projects, and I think particularly of all the Bureau of Reclamation projects, there's a requirement to do a benefit cost analysis, and it is common also in questions of resource use to do a formal environmental impact statement covering a broad array of issues and questions. But I started doing research on, where did this come from? Where did the notion of public trust resource management come from? And frankly, turns out I was taught this in graduate school and didn't even know it. I mean, I didn't see where this was really going. And so the concept that has been the foundation for cost-benefit analysis and, in some measure, environmental impact statement analysis is something that economists dating back to, early 50s, 1950s, had conceived of in terms of total economic value. And total economic value isn't just use value. It isn't just the extractive use of a resource, but it is composed of a variety of other issues that need to be considered. So that you've got this use value that is depicted in this slide, and that includes the extractive use value, the non-extractive use values, and indirect use values. And I've given some examples over the right-hand side. So obviously irrigated agriculture and domestic use can be quantified in terms of economic value. In-stream flow is a little bit more difficult, isn't it? And there's in Hawaii, in-stream flow is codified as a proper allocation of water resources, and there's as the water comes down from the mountain, there are these areas where culturally, a religiously important crop, I guess you'd call it a crop, is grown. It's called a taro root, and it's very important in the traditional lives of native Hawaiians. And then you get to the indirect use value of food security, for example, and preservation of the watershed. Those are all components related to use value. But the non-use values are equally important. The existence of the resource, the maintenance of the option to use that resource in the future, the bequest value. Boy, I'll tell you a story about bequest value. I'm taking a test in graduate school, and I called it bequeath value. Professor jumped all over me and said, it's bequest. Well, regardless, these are all characteristics of the total economic value of resources, of public trust resources. Well, unfortunately, there was this fire on Maui, and the Department of Land and Natural Resources over the past few months has been completely preoccupied with those issues. And my clients have had to basically postpone their plans, their efforts to move forward with obtaining the right to use water. But more importantly, and I tell this specific story to illustrate, at least it's illustrative to me, of how we've changed as a society. I mean, our legislature said, let's just buy out junior water right holders in the Pecos to resolve the problems with our compact with Texas. Public money. We do a variety of things now, whether we've heard a whole lot of very interesting presentations today that talk about these public trust values. And then I go back to what happened with Professor Dumar's changing from a seniority-based allocation of water to advocating for the legislature to just buy water rights to resolve problems. In the context of my work, that dissertation that just sat on a shelf because it was, at that date, not a viable solution. The attorneys spent the next 20 years trying to come to a resolution of the Amont case. And strangely enough, one of the primary components of that is the ability to lease water. So it's, and so this is what I would like to bring to you as a conclusion of this meeting today, is that we're at the 40,000 foot level when you talk in these terms, but you see the practical application of this total economic value in the context of our water resource management strategies. And I think you can anticipate there will be more of that. With that, I'm happy to stand for questions. I know I'm a little over on time, but it's, in my view of the world, important to put the details that we talked about today in the perspective of this resource management issue called public trust resource management. With that, thank you.
Do we have any questions for John? Well, feel free to ask him any questions if you think of them later throughout this conference. But thank you, John.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. This is Kaustubh Neupane. I work for NM WRRI and a PhD student at NMSU. It's my pleasure to introduce two speakers, Connie Maxwell and Sarah Fox. They will be talking on regional water planning in New Mexico in the face of climate challenges. I want to read their short biography. Connie Maxwell is an ecological planner that works with communities on local and regional levels. At NM WRRI, she spearheaded the Water and Community Collaboration Lab, which fosters links between the best science, communities, stakeholders, and students to inform decision-making and education on water and the environment and support transformations towards resilience. Most recently, she has been working with regions around New Mexico on long-term planning frameworks, including with the New Mexico Eschequia Association and their key partners on a Building Agricultural and Water Resilience Initiative and the South Central New Mexico Stormwater Management Coalition on watershed restoration approaches that can mitigate climate challenges. Our next speaker is Sarah Fox. She works for NM Interstate Stream Commission. Sarah Fox is the senior water planner for the New Mexico Interstate Stream Commission. Sarah is a professional engineer who holds a bachelor and master's degrees in environmental and civil engineering. Sarah started her career working in the Colorado as a water rights engineer. She moved to New Mexico 2 years ago and began working for the state of New Mexico on water rights and water planning. Let's give warm welcome to our speakers.
Hello, the final act. Here we are. I will agree with everyone up here. This is kind of a weird clicker, so just want to make sure I can get it. Here? Is this? Maybe. There we go. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Fox. You may have previously known me as Sarah Goldstein, so not a new person, just a new name. I'm here to talk about our new initiative in the Interstate Stream Commission's water planning program, which is the Regional Water Planning Reinvigoration, I believe we're kind of calling it. And this was all started from a legislative initiative, which was the passing of the Senate Bill 337, the Water Security Planning Act, in this last legislative session. I have some information about climate change that I'm just going to kind of skip over, but I'm really happy to answer questions about that in the question session below. But essentially, like we've heard today, New Mexico is getting warmer. The temperature increase will increase throughout the entire state. This will cause increased aridity over the course of New Mexico for the next 50 years and beyond. And what does that mean for our water? That means although we aren't really seeing a definite trend in our water, our precipitation, the fact that temperatures are rising means that we will have less water because as temperatures rise, everybody gets thirstier. You, me, the plants, the atmosphere. And we're not alone. We're in this kind of with the entire, Western United States, and this map doesn't include Mexico, but the brown doesn't stop at the border. So with all of these climate challenges that we've been hearing about all day from many different things, we've heard about lots of different initiatives that the state and others are putting together to try to get ahead of this problem. So what we have been doing at the Interstate Stream Commission Planning Program is implementing the Water Security Planning Act. So this was passed unanimously through the legislature last session and will transform and reinvigorate regional water planning in New Mexico. So currently our regional water plan or regions look like this. There's 16 of them. For reference, lots of other states have significantly less. Even Texas has less regions than we do, and they're a much bigger state. The original statute was passed in 1978 and was really defensive against Texas basically taking our water. And it really has kind of served its purpose by having plans. But in this new age of climate change, we needed a new statute. So the Water Security Planning Act was passed to reinvigorate regional water planning. We are in the first steps of starting this process, which will hopefully take about a year and a half to promulgate rules and adopt guidelines, and then stand up regional planning entities throughout the state that can then be the entities that help us fund, prioritize projects throughout the state that are working well for communities, and hopefully getting synergy between all different types of state programs. So we're capitalizing on lots of different aspects that you've been hearing about today, the unprecedented federal funding that's available, the Water Task Force, which hasn't been mentioned as much today, but was a task force that was initiated by State Engineer Mike Hammond. And all of these things are kind of coming together with the Water Security Planning Act and our implementation. So where we are now, this is kind of our schedule for where we are and where we're going. So we drafted and passed the bill earlier this year. We've been working with a lot of different contractors. One contractor is a media and communications firm to make sure that we can spread the information of water planning and reinvigorating regional water planning beyond kind of the people in this room in our context. And then we are also working with a data visualization contractor to help visualize a lot of the data of different ways we could envision doing our regional water planning and breaking up regions. We have just launched our website, kind of a soft launch, with an initial survey that is coming soon, along with hopefully some anonymous polling aspects that will go with that. And then towards the end of into next year, we'll be holding large public meetings that will help us define where our new regional water planning boundaries are, and with a goal to have the rules promulgated and adopted and guidelines adopted by the end of next year, beginning of 2025. After that, then the work begins. We will then make a schedule in which we can help stand up regions and develop and implement regional water plans. So I want to make this very clear. This is what we will be doing at the Interstate Stream Commission, but we are in a moment of increasing water scarcity and water crisis. Parallel paths of people doing their own planning need to happen in parallel with our schedule. People who want to get together and say in the Lower Rio Grande with their new consent decree, they need to be getting together ahead of this schedule, starting to work on solutions so that when we're ready to set up these regional plans, hopefully their regional plans and projects that they've prioritized are already ready to go. And then we can kind of start a rolling basis on how to do water planning. So I'm trying to keep this really short because we're running still a little bit behind time. But here is a screenshot of our website. I'm really excited about it. I encourage everyone to go and check it out. Some of the links are still getting online, but we intend to have a pretty short survey and a large public outreach campaign coming soon to both inform New Mexicans on where we're going and how we're going to get there, and advertise these large public meetings to help promulgate rules and adopt guidelines later next year. And that is my incredibly short version of what we are doing. And I think we'll take questions at the end, Connie. Okay, sounds great. Thank you all.
Ooh, they weren't kidding. It was bright. Well, thank you all for sticking around. And thank you, Sarah. It's an incredibly exciting time. Let me make sure. Okay. This process is starting at a critical time. We all know that climate change is here and communities are experiencing very significant challenges. So particularly for this particular process has really highlighted a commitment to be a community-based process throughout kind of its legislative history, and to provide funding and support to regions to fund implementation of the identified projects. This is an extremely important element of planning. Quite often you do a plan, it goes in a drawer, and nothing occurs after that. So to be able to actually support projects coming out of this is incredibly important. I want to take just a few moments in this presentation to turn to what is really at the heart of what many of us are passionate about, helping communities really make a difference in the face of the challenges in this era of climate change. There's a lot of talk of community and planning, but what does a community-based approach really mean? I want to share just a few aspects of what we have found to be critical elements in a community-based process. We have been distilling these elements into a framework in collaboration with communities in the regions that are highlighted on this map in northern New Mexico and in southern New Mexico. While there's large agreement that healthy and resilient agricultural river valleys on watershed scales are critical for mitigating floods and recharging aquifers, we all know we still have a long way to go to resurface and develop the strategies that can actually realize this resilience. These systems are complex. These community water and environmental systems are complex. As has been shown in projects today, in New Mexico, we are playing a leadership role. And a large part of that is that we have many communities that have centuries and millennia of traditions that have looked at these systems holistically and carry the knowledge of the rich complexity of these systems into today. We're in the process of creating mosaics of videos to highlight voices from these communities. And I'm honored to bring some of those voices and rich knowledge into this room as they'll be our last word, a little bit of a draft of a video. So this is the framework that we have been distilling. And you see in the top two pictures here, the project that Kate Lacey highlighted in the River Stewardship Program. These are pictures from the Conjilon project. Us at the Water Institute are leading that particular project. The first most important point to make is that the goals of any project really need to be built from the community itself. And what does that really mean? I mean, from a starting point, we know that all of our agencies have different priorities, and we need to conduct projects to make a difference throughout the state. But in fact, many times, we can find alignment between the priorities of an agency, of an organization, and what the community needs are. This is what we did for the River Stewardship Project, and I'll highlight our process a little bit more, but we went to communities where we knew there were particular issues and said, what do you actually need in this particular community? Short term, and then we assembled a team to look at both the short, medium, and long term and really get at the root of the problems themselves. We pulled everybody together so you can see on the plan collaboratively. You can see a couple of the landowners there that are also the extension agent and the Soil and Water Conservation District, and they shared with us that in this particular community, they get 2 distributions of water a year. 2 times they take water from the acequia. And in recent years, many times they've only had 1. And so the consequences are really quite high. And so the guy on the left, Norman Vigil, the guy looking down, really brilliant guy with amazing amounts of experience, said, what we need to do, because snowpack is diminishing,
We need to restore the natural processes in the watershed so that our floodplains are acting like sponges and mimicking that dynamic of the floodplain. And so we've worked with the community. We had a wonderful meeting that particular day. That's a picture of that meeting where we brought everybody together, Forest Service and so forth. And we were able to brainstorm and strategize a variety of holistic solutions, which are incredibly exciting. Virtual fencing to manage grazing and so forth. And out of that, we did that as a kickoff to the design, the survey for the design for the restoration practitioner. And so that design is going to be informed directly with the community's knowledge. And of course, we are monitoring along the way to actually look at the effects. So that then in the last approach, we can say, the benefits are quantified. We know how much restoration it's going to take in order to achieve these community goals. And of course, these are difficult things to quantify and difficult things to model. And so the Forest Service leadership there was so excited by this and has been touting this project. She talked about how wonderful it is that it's community-led and that it is bringing scientists and students and everybody together. Kaustoff, who just introduced us as one of the students, several other students here are working on this particular project, and had an argument with one of her staff who said to her, we at the Forest Service should be telling the community how the project should go. And she said, no, we are done with that. We have to go into a new paradigm. So what does this actually mean? Projects need to be community projects. Some of you may have seen this before. This is kind of standard theory on participation, 1969. Participation, working with the community, is ultimately about power, agency. Do communities have agency to, in fact, be represented? Do they have control over the project? Do they have a seat at the table? That is something that many people have talked about today. The trust of working together in collaboration with the communities is built over history. And so we walk into these communities, a lot of these communities have a history of broken trust that we also need to respect. Here, just an example from this particular article. The World Bank included both giving information and consultation as the forms of communication, which giving information and consultation is a part of this, of course. But then they went on to equate the provision of that information as empowerment, which we know is not actually the case. I've been to many restoration projects over my time, and it's very striking. Is it the community's project or is it the agency's project? And quite often, it's the agency's project. That doesn't mean that we turn it over to the community and dump it on their laps. Throughout the world, that is actually what happened when many developing nations turned to a community-based process. They dumped the resource on their populations. The communities that we've been working with, they want the collaboration. They know that they have immense knowledge about their local systems, but it's very difficult to then scale it up to a region. It's very difficult to quantify it. It needs to be measured, it needs to be assessed, and this is really what we are here for. We have all been trained. Everything that we have done has brought us to this moment. And in this moment, we have the ability. Sarah's going to help us tremendously. She's the project manager for this regional planning program. She's going to help us tremendously to all work together and kickstart these more innovative, these more integrative strategies. The processes where we actually say, how does the whole system work together? and we have to actually test those. So translating voice into action, it involves efforts from above and below. And from above, from our agencies, we have to make the commitment to support wider institutional changes and to support the political will to convert that will into tangible action. And from below, we know our politicians need to know that what we do really makes a difference to communities on the ground. And so the communities need to come together and continue to say, these are the programs that we actually need. And in doing so, I've found that communities, they absolutely have to have their immediate needs met. There are emergencies in place. But people are sick of just the Band-Aids. They are very eager to say, how are we going to get to the root of the problem? So that's where we can really help. I mean, all of us are at a critical time and have an enormous opportunity to collaborate with communities. Oh, I didn't, I'm looking at my screen, I didn't advance. So I'll go to the next screen. This report, there were a couple of diagrams in the last presentation from this report that us at the Water Institute put together. The ISC, when they were putting their 50-year water plan, came to the Water Institute and we said, you know what, regions are really critical. These strategies, these innovative strategies that work with communities, they happen on local levels. And those communities are not as connected as they want to be and need to be. And that is the regional level. So we went to different regions to understand their issues, their desired strategies, their visions for the future. And for the San Juan Basin, here we're working with Paul Montoya, who used to work for the city of Farmington, water resource specialist. If anybody has ever worked in San Juan, knows Paul very well. And I'll just summarize some of the points that he distilled from the focus group that we did. Complex issues in the area, many water users competing over surface water supply, based on snowmelt and summer monsoon. We've heard a lot about this particular system, the limited aquifer storage. He really highlights that people have recognized there's a paradigm shift in both the demand and the supply of water. It's the change of the socio-hydrology fabric of the basin itself. Those collaborations have really started to shift thinking about how to use, reuse, and capture water more efficiently. Collaboration among many groups, in collaboration with the watershed group, with the municipal group, agricultural groups are starting. After our Northern New Mexico focus group, us at the Water Institute and the New Mexico Acequia Association began an initiative which we call Building Regional Agriculture and Water Resilience. And we have planned, secured funding, and begun a series of projects that aim to holistically address community needs. I'm not going to go into detail about these particular projects. All of them have started with the community vision. We have funding from the USDA to actually look at crop and to look at holistic systems, traditional and organic systems that involve different ideal crops and water practices and so forth. We have many many projects of actually putting these practices into action. And then, we have a synthesis grant, which is just about to start, Bureau of Reclamation, where we're doing we're really focusing on water sharing agreements and water budget models. And just a brief little plug for that particular project. The models that we're doing are integrative models between socio indicators and hydrology indicators, and they're customized to the community's actually issues. So I'm going to stop. I'm going to start this video, and it'll be the last word on this particular thing. But you'll notice Don Bustos, a wonderful farmer in the Santa Cruz watershed basin, talks about such a need, and he describes a scenario. We need a model where if you had farmers that are spreading more surface water, what are the benefits of that? It's the largest source of recharge to our aquifers. So what are the benefits to the farming system? What are the benefits to the water system? What are the benefits to the environmental system? And then if you could then test what the effects of another scenario, if a tech company wanted to come and do more pumping, what are the effects of that particular scenario? Before I actually turn to the video itself, and I will let that be the last word, it's only 6 minutes, it's a short little video. I do want to highlight I can't actually see it. Yeah, just want to highlight that there's a New Mexico Water Dialogue meeting on January 11th to talk about this regional water planning initiative. And so with that, I'll leave you with the video of the focus group of the North Central New Mexico Acequia region. Can you guys hit play on that? Great.
What's the most important thing with a connection to the land? It's a sense of freedom, of independence, of being able to live off the land and really provide for our families.
And add security along with freedom and independence. Domestic wells are going dry, and we are maintaining our security by maintaining the acequias, both to perpetuate the potential for food supply, but also the groundwater.
I'm looking out at our well house, which is right along a lateral. Someone dug this hand-dug well on this lateral because that's the way it will recharge. I thought of my son, and for me, as someone who comes from a very long line of subsistence farmers, without the water, without the land, what do I pass on? And that leads right into food. This is what we eat. This is what we do. That's just an echo of the querencia and sense of place.
We have a 400 plus year of repartimiento, of water sharing. And for me, it's important to protect that tradition.
I see the traditions of water sharing and agriculture provide something to the state and beyond. Water supplies. Some of our research is to look at documenting the benefits of traditional agriculture and hopefully convince others of why it's important to protect agriculture.
We need a fully funded and very community-oriented, I'll call it a science center. That's been successful for myself and other growers. We need that direct connection to research that impact us directly, and that's for every region in New Mexico.
I personally believe that we would have had a water crisis even if the rainfall had continued the way it was in the 80s and partly into the 90s because of the extent of the groundwater pumping and the poor condition of our watersheds. Unsustainable development patterns are rampant. Really bad water management decisions, like assuming that paper water, moving water around through water transfers is the solution, and developers will have you believe that. But I think if you live on the land, you know the truth. Ultimately, these surface to ground transfers and groundwater pumping, they shrink the pie of the overall water resource.
If you don't use every drop you have or you have a right to, the concept is that the state engineer is going to come and take everything away from us. This whole water law was set up to be very adversarial. You're trying to have a community-oriented vision, and none of the systems in place is there to do that. That's one of the bigger challenges I've seen.
We should be ready to capture massive flood flow, because when it comes, look at what happens in the Southwest. We have drought, and then you see the streets running brim full in Albuquerque, and it's a flood issue. Starting at the top of the watershed, every thinning project should concurrently be stabilizing the soil bed, the landscape. Logging practices have created rostrones, gullies, and this is not really widely recognized. The high country is literally hemorrhaging water that should be getting soaked in. this aquifer recharge that creates the ojitos, the acequias, as everyone knows, are partly supplied by spring flow. That's all compromised, and it's compromising our aquifers too.
It would have been interesting to tell any new business moving in, you have to help restore or increase our water supply somehow.
The policy versus other strategies, they have to be really culturally relevant, all of the strategies. When things come from above, they don't have the same meaning or relevance to communities. Are we building off of strategies that keep people on the land? Are people practicing their traditions and growing food? What's the quality of life involved? I just keep wanting to say youth. Who are we building this for? So we want them to have strategies that we've built that they can build upon. Those kids, they're just full of ideas and vision. So passing even the wisdom and experience we bring.
To increase the amount of farmers by 2050 to have a viable and holistic watershed within the Rio Santa Cruz. We're going to have to figure out how many of those acres have to go into agricultural production to really recharge the aquifer, to make it a healthy stream system, and to keep it alive. I thought about a model that might be developed. Let's say you increase amount of farmers by X amount by the year 2050. The benefits to that, to the watering system, to the community health, to environmental, those are all quantifiable benefits. And then let's say you get one of these tech companies, they want water. Here's the environmental economic impact occurring when you're displacing those traditional growers to do something else. So when the community decides to make decisions, they have something in their hand.
I was very grateful to be part of this dialogue and to have this opportunity to appreciate the lifetime of work that people have devoted to taking care of the land and water in their communities. There's some very visionary ideas, and they're grounded in a very somber reality about the projections for how dry our future is going to be. That was reassuring to me because I feel like we're looking to the future clear-eyed and still bringing forth hope and optimism about what we can do in our communities.
Thank you all.
Okay, thank you very much, Connie and Sarah. We just have one last inspirational word to kick off our poster session. Sarah, are you out there? So Sarah is from NMSU Alamogordo and Alamogordo High, and is going to just give us a word of inspiration here.
So, like he said, I am Sarah. I've been working on a PhD under Dr. Manoj Shukla at NMSU, graduating on December 8th, so I'm super excited. Thanks. I am also a full-time teacher at Alamogordo High School, where I teach biology and AP Environmental Science. And I have brought 19 of my 24 students here to kind of share with you some of the things that we've been doing in our class, because this whole project kind of started as I have been finishing my degree. I've been attending some of these conferences, and we always hear that we need to get the youth involved and we need to encourage them and get them excited about water, because this is what we're handing them for their future. And so I sat down this past summer and laid out all of my crazy ideas to my principal, Mrs. Shea, who is here with me today. And I also spoke with another very good friend who is the Holloman Air Force K-12 STEM Outreach Coordinator, and she's got more in her title as well. But her job is also to encourage STEM in our area. And I laid out this crazy plan of I want to take these kids to a local water source every month so that they're getting out there, they're getting to see what New Mexico has to offer. And also getting to learn a little bit about how we test for water quality and what are we looking at and what are we looking for. And so that just kind of spiraled a little bit, and I wrote a WRRI grant, or student grant, and here we are. And so there are 7 posters made by high school students in our poster session. where they can share with you some of the things that they have started to learn. We have only gone out on our field trips 3 times, so be patient with them. They're not quite sure what they're actually talking about yet, but we're getting to that in class probably in January. And then you can also talk with me a little bit more about the whole project and our collaboration team that we're working together with, because the ultimate goal is to take what we're doing right now in Alamogordo and spread it across our state so that other public school districts can do something very similar. So, thank you.